Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. This happened about 3 months ago, and I still get a cold sweat thinking about it. I don't know if I was being too calm in the moment, or if I was just being stupid. But this whole experience really messed with my sense of safety and security at home. I'm a 31-year-old guy living alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I'm pretty relaxed about my surroundings generally. I make sure to lock everything up, check the windows, and I'm reasonably aware of what's going on around me. I don't usually get rattled by much, but this time it's been hard to shake. It started on a regular Tuesday night. I was coming home late after work, around 10:30 in the evening. The neighborhood was completely quiet, and I parked my car in the garage like I always do. I got out, went inside, and sat down to relax after a long day. About an hour later, I realized I needed to grab something out of the car. Nothing major, just a jacket I'd left in the back seat. I didn't think much of it, but when I walked out into the garage, something immediately felt wrong. The first thing that caught my attention was a smell musty, old, almost damp. That definitely didn't belong. I figured it might just be the old garage accumulating odors, but it didn't sit right with me. I flipped on the overhead light and looked around, expecting to see nothing more than my usual mess. Boxes, tools, my car. But then I saw him. He was crouched in the far corner, hidden behind a stack of boxes, barely visible in the shadows. He didn't move when I walked in. He was just there, waiting. My first instinct was to freeze, but I didn't. I've never been the type to panic, and right then I made a conscious choice. I wasn't going to hide or lock myself in the house. I wasn't about to let some stranger think they could just come into my space, uninvited. Without missing a beat, I walked straight toward him. I didn't shout or make a scene, but I made it very clear I wasn't backing down. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice firm. I wasn't about to show any weakness or uncertainty. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at me from behind the boxes. "Get out of my garage," I said, now just a few feet away from him, keeping my cool but definitely not backing down. The guy still didn't make a move. He didn't even flinch. That's when I started to get genuinely pissed off. "Are you seriously going to make me drag you out of here?" I asked, stepping even closer. I wasn't playing games anymore. I wanted him out, and if he wouldn't leave voluntarily, I was prepared to force the issue. That's when he finally moved. He stood up slowly, his hands raised as if trying to show he wasn't armed. "I'm not here to hurt you," he muttered, but his words did nothing to improve the situation. I didn't care if he was armed or not. This guy was in my space, hiding in my garage, and that alone made him dangerous in my book. "Then why the hell are you hiding in my garage?" I shot back, not letting him off the hook. He didn't respond, just stared at me like he was calculating what to do next. At this point, I was done talking. I turned around and went straight for the door, locking it behind me. I wasn't going to give him the chance to make another move. I immediately called the cops. While I waited, I kept my eyes on the garage through the window. I wasn't about to take my attention off of him. He stood there for a few minutes, just staring at the door. I wasn't sure if he was considering making a run for it, or just trying to figure out his next move. But when the police finally showed up, he was gone. The cops checked the area, the garage, and even the surrounding alley. Nothing, no forced entry, no stolen items. Everything was just as it had been before, except for the fact that some guy had been hiding in my garage, waiting to do God knows what. They ran a quick check of the area, but found no one matching his description. It was like he just vanished. I won't lie, I felt unnerved for a while after that. I put up extra lights around the house, got a security system installed, and I make sure to check every corner of my property when I come home now. I don't know what that guy's endgame was, but I wasn't about to find out. So to the guy who thought he could make my garage his hiding spot, let's not meet again. You better hope we don't cross paths, because next time you won't get away so easily. This happened a few months ago, and it still scares me every time I think about it. It's one of those things I can't quite explain, but something definitely wasn't right. I'm a guy who lives alone in a one-bedroom apartment. I've always felt safe here in a relatively quiet part of town, and I've never had any reason to be paranoid. I take basic security precautions. I always lock my doors, check the windows, and keep an eye out. I work from home most days, so I'm always around the place. But on the day this happened, I had to leave for a few hours. It was a regular day. I left my apartment at around 9:30 in the morning just to run some errands and grab lunch. I didn't expect to be gone for too long, maybe 4 or 5 hours tops. When I got back at around 3:30 in the afternoon, everything seemed normal until I reached for the door handle. It was locked. Now, I'm sure I didn't lock it when I left. I've got a habit of leaving it unlocked, which I know is probably dumb, but I've always felt safe here. I've never double locked it, just turn the deadbolt when I leave and leave it at that. So when I found it locked on the way in, I paused for a second. I chalked it up to a mistake. Maybe I locked it without thinking. But even as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, that feeling of unease crept up on me. The first thing I noticed when I walked in was the silence. I live alone, so the place is usually pretty quiet when I get back, but something felt off. I walked through the living room, kitchen, and hallway, checking everything, but nothing seemed out of place. Everything was just as I'd left it, except for one thing. My bedroom door was closed. I'm the kind of guy who always leaves doors slightly cracked. It's a small thing, but I do it out of habit. So when I saw that the door was fully shut, I got a weird knot in my stomach. I walked over to it and opened it. The first thing that hit me was the cold. The window was wide open. I never open the window in winter, especially with the freezing temperatures. I keep it shut always, so seeing it open a good 3 inches or so made my stomach drop. I walked over to the window, checking to see if anything was off. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints outside, nothing that stood out. But then I noticed something even stranger. The bed had been disturbed. It wasn't like I'd left it messy or anything, but it was obvious that someone had been sitting on it. The sheets were slightly askew, and I could see an imprint of someone's weight on the mattress. My heart skipped a beat. I checked the locks on the window. They were fine, nothing broken or tampered with. But the fact that the window was open and the bed had been disturbed, that's what did it for me. I checked the rest of the apartment, but it was all still in order. No signs of forced entry, no missing items. My wallet was in the same spot on the kitchen counter. Everything seemed undisturbed, except for the locked door and the open window. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went to check the building's security cameras, but the footage was useless. It only showed me leaving in the morning and coming back in the afternoon. Nothing else out of the ordinary. The cameras didn't pick up any other movement, but I knew someone had been inside. I could feel it. That feeling of being watched never quite went away. Even now, when I come home and see the door unlocked or notice something a bit out of place, that feeling creeps back up. It's like someone was here, someone was waiting for me to leave, and then made themselves comfortable in my space. I don't know if it was someone I knew or a random intruder, but I haven't felt right in my apartment since. I still check the locks every time I leave and come back, but I'll never forget that sense of unease that stayed with me after walking through that door. This didn't happen directly to me, but to my aunt approximately 2 years ago. She lives in a peaceful residential area, one of those established neighborhoods with narrow lots, privacy fences between properties, and spacious backyards. It's the type of community where residents don't worry much about locking doors during daylight hours, which, as we discovered, isn't always the wisest approach. It was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, on a weekend broad daylight, completely normal circumstances. Her house features a detached garage in the back and a small outdoor kitchen setup near the rear patio, where she was preparing food for a family dinner planned for that evening. She had left her phone inside the house to avoid distractions, and because of how her backyard is designed, with a large privacy fence and several mature trees, she couldn't hear anything happening near the front of the house. After being outside for approximately 20 to 30 minutes, she walked back into the house through the back door, which opens directly into her kitchen. From there, her living room is visible, just a few steps away, through an arched doorway. That's when she saw them. 2 men in the middle of carrying her flat-screen television out of the house. They were halfway across the living room, holding the TV between them, and they hadn't heard her enter through the back. As soon as she stepped through the doorway and spotted them, there was a frozen moment where everyone just stared at each other in complete shock. Then she screamed, a full-throated, terrified scream that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Both men immediately panicked. They dropped the television right there on her hardwood floor, completely shattering the screen and damaging the frame, then ran straight out the front door, leaving it wide open behind them. My aunt was shaking so violently she could barely manage to dial 911, but she somehow got through to emergency services. Police arrived relatively quickly and took a comprehensive report. They checked for fingerprints, canvassed the neighborhood asking questions, and reviewed footage from her doorbell camera. Unfortunately, the camera hadn't captured the men entering the house, but it did record them running out the front door in obvious panic. There were no license plates visible on any vehicles, no clear shots of their faces, and as far as we know, they were never caught. It appears they had been watching the house and assumed no one was home when they saw her go into the backyard. They probably didn't realize she was still on the property. The strange part is that they must have entered through the front door, possibly even knocking first to make sure no one answered, because there were no signs of forced entry anywhere. It's likely the front door was simply unlocked, which is something my aunt has never done again since this incident. What bothers me most about the whole situation is how quickly it all happened in broad daylight, in a quiet neighborhood, while she was home the entire time. Nobody expects to walk into their own house and discover strangers attempting to rob them. Since then, my aunt has upgraded all her locks and actually keeps her doors locked at all times. She still gets nervous when she's home alone, especially if she needs to spend extended time in the backyard. It's just a reminder that we should lock our doors even during the middle of the day, and maybe take a quick look inside before walking into our homes. This happened back in 2018, and it stuck with me in a way I can't really shake. I've only told a few close friends, but one of them suggested I share it to see if anyone else has experienced something similar. I still don't know what I encountered that weekend in the woods of northern Michigan, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. I was 21 at the time and had gone up to rural northern Michigan to visit an old family friend who I'll call Robert. My dad and Robert had been close since childhood, and Robert owned a small hunting cabin out near Crystal Lake, surrounded by thick forest and marshland. No neighbors for miles in any direction. The isolation was both peaceful and unsettling. My dad couldn't make the trip due to work commitments, so I went with my older brother Marcus to help Robert with some firewood preparation and get the cabin ready for deer season. The cabin was modest, just 2 small rooms with no electricity and a wood-burning stove for heat. The walls were made of weathered logs that creaked and settled throughout the night, adding to the rustic atmosphere. Since space was tight and it was early fall, Robert suggested I could sleep in the old pop-up camper parked about 200 feet behind the cabin, down a narrow dirt path and tucked under some towering old pine trees. It was dry, reasonably safe, and honestly, I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I was looking forward to the quiet after months of city noise and college stress. The first night, we had a hearty, chilly dinner cooked over an open fire pit. We sat around the crackling flames as Robert told us stories about bear sightings, strange tracks he'd found over the years, and the occasional weird sounds that echoed through the forest at night. Nothing too outlandish, just enough to make you glance nervously at the tree line after dark. The fire cast dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames, creating an almost hypnotic effect. I headed out to the camper at around 11 p.m. with my headlamp and a warm sleeping bag. The night air was crisp and carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth. About halfway down the winding path, I clicked off my light to look at the stars. They were absolutely incredible, like diamonds scattered across black velvet, more brilliant than anything you could see in the city. But in that moment of stargazing, I noticed how uncomfortably quiet it had gotten. This wasn't just peaceful forest quiet, the kind you expect in nature. I mean dead silent. No wind rustling through branches. No insects chirping their nighttime songs, no distant owl calls. Just this heavy, pressing stillness that seemed to wrap around me like a blanket. Then the feeling hit me like a physical force. I suddenly felt like I was being watched, like something was standing just beyond the tree line, studying me. I don't know how to explain it, but I suddenly felt completely exposed, vulnerable, like prey being stalked by a predator. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to move, to get to safety immediately. I bolted toward the camper, my feet pounding on the dirt path, and slammed the door behind me. I quickly locked both latches with shaking hands, my heart hammering in my chest. I tried laughing it off, telling myself I was just rattled from Robert's stories and the isolation. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I barely slept that night. I kept hearing soft sounds outside the camper, faint footsteps on the fallen leaves, what sounded like something brushing against the canvas sides of the camper. It never got close enough for me to be completely sure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was circling the camper, studying it, waiting. The next day, I told Marcus about my experience, and he teased me for being overly dramatic. But Robert was quiet, really quiet. I think he knew I wasn't making it up, that I had encountered something he was familiar with but didn't want to discuss. That second night, I asked if I could bring Robert's dog Scout with me for company. Scout was an older Labrador mix, usually lazy and laid back, but solid and reliable. The walk back to the camper that night felt much easier with Scout trotting beside me, his presence comforting, until we got near the tree line again. That's when Scout stopped dead in his tracks. His ears swept up and forward, his head turned slowly to the side, scanning the darkness. His tail dropped low between his legs. He didn't bark, he didn't growl, but he clearly didn't want to move forward. His body language spoke volumes about what he was sensing. We eventually made it inside the camper, and Scout curled up next to my sleeping area, his warm body pressed against the bed. I started to drift off, finally feeling safe with my four-legged companion beside me. Then I had this horrible, vivid dream. Something was whispering my name from just outside the canvas wall. The voice wasn't malicious or threatening, but it was deeply wrong. It was repetitive, like someone trying to mimic my own voice, but not quite getting it right. The cadence was off, the tone slightly distorted. I woke up in a cold sweat, my shirt clinging to my skin. Scout was sitting up, facing the corner of the camper, his hackles raised and ears pinned back against his head. His breathing was shallow and rapid, like he was trying to stay as quiet as possible while remaining alert. Morning couldn't come fast enough. I packed my stuff up and told Robert I'd head back a day early. He didn't question it, just nodded with understanding in his eyes, like he'd been expecting this conversation. Before we left, I decided to take Scout out into the clearing behind the cabin for some fresh air, hoping to shake off the weird feelings from the night before. I thought maybe walking around in daylight would help me rationalize what had happened, convince myself it was all in my head. As I walked along a faint trail with Scout sniffing around and wagging his tail like normal, something made me stop and look down. I noticed a strange set of marks in the dirt leading from the woods toward the clearing. They were deep, jagged scratches, almost as if something had dragged itself across the ground using claws. The dirt was torn up, raked through like something with very sharp talons had been scraping and pulling itself forward. I bent down to get a closer look, my stomach tightening with unease. The marks led toward the edge of the woods, but then they just stopped abruptly. They didn't fade away or get lighter. They just ended, as if whatever made them had simply vanished. I straightened up, feeling deeply uneasy, and turned to call Scout. But before I could get a word out, he froze completely. He was standing just beyond the strange marks, staring directly into the woods. His body was completely still, like a statue. His eyes locked on something among the trees that I couldn't see. I called his name, trying to get him to come back to me, but he didn't respond. His ears flattened against his head. His tail dropped even lower. He didn't even twitch or acknowledge my voice. I started to walk toward him, but something prickled the back of my neck. It was that same sensation of being watched, but this time it was different, more intense. It felt like something much larger than me was out there, something that could hurt me if it wanted to. When I reached Scout and grabbed his collar, I noticed something I'll never forget. His eyes were wide, staring directly into the woods, as if something was standing just beyond the trees, watching both of us. Then I heard it, my own voice echoing back from the woods. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even close, but it sounded exactly like my voice, delayed and slightly distorted, almost as if something was trying to repeat what I had just said, but not quite getting it right. The timing was off by just a fraction of a second. I turned toward the woods and yelled, "Scout, come here." The echo came again, but this time it was louder, more insistent, and definitely wrong. It wasn't me anymore. The voice had changed subtly, become something else wearing my voice like a mask. That was it. I didn't even look back. I grabbed Scout, yanked him toward the cabin, and ran as fast as I could. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I tried explaining what happened to Robert, but he just looked at me with this unreadable expression, like he was weighing how much to tell me. Finally, he spoke very seriously, his voice lower than usual. He explained that if I ever hear a voice from the woods calling to me, I should ignore it completely. Never respond to it, never acknowledge it, and under no circumstances should I ever go toward it. Then he told me to think no more about it, that some things in the deep woods are better left alone. I haven't been back to that cabin since. I think Robert knows more than he's willing to share. And frankly, I'm not sure I want to know what he's keeping to himself. My brother still thinks it was just an echo or my imagination running wild. But I know what I heard. And more importantly, I know that Robert believed me. Whatever was out there in those woods, mimicking voices and leaving strange marks in the dirt, I hope I never encounter it again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, especially when they involve things that can perfectly copy your own voice and use it to call you into the darkness. A friend of mine's family owns a cabin on about 60 acres of pristine wilderness out in the Pacific Northwest. It's deep woods, incredibly isolated, with no neighbors in sight, and the nearest paved road a good couple of miles away through winding forest trails. The cabin is tucked away in a natural clearing, completely surrounded by towering Douglas firs and cedar trees on all sides. You'd never find it if you didn't already know exactly where to go. They've even got a locked steel gate about a mile down the access trail, to keep out trespassers and unauthorized hunters. The gate is serious business. Heavy-duty steel with multiple locks and warning signs posted every few feet. It's the kind of setup that makes you feel completely secure and totally cut off from the outside world at the same time. The place has always felt safe to me. You get your usual Pacific Northwest wildlife. Black bears, coyotes, raccoons that are way too smart for their own good. Sometimes you hear the haunting calls of great horned owls echoing through the trees, or the occasional elk crashing through the underbrush like a freight train. But nothing that ever made me feel nervous or unsafe to be there. If anything, the wildlife added to the charm and authenticity of the wilderness experience. A couple of autumns ago, my friend Jake and I went up for what we planned to be a relaxing weekend getaway. Just the two of us, no distractions, no responsibilities. We brought a cooler packed with food, his old golden retriever Max, and a couple of 12-gauge shotguns just in case we encountered any aggressive wildlife. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi, no connection to the outside world. The whole point was to completely disconnect from modern life and reconnect with nature. We spent the first day hiking around the property, exploring new trails we hadn't discovered before. We did some target shooting with old aluminum cans set up on fallen logs, and tackled some basic maintenance on the cabin. We cleared brush off the trails that had grown over during the summer, chopped and stacked firewood for the evening, and cleaned out the wood stove chimney to make sure it would draw properly. Classic fall preparation chores that felt satisfying and productive. That night, we cooked dinner over the fire pit outside, grilling steaks and roasting vegetables in foil packets. We had a couple of beers as the sun set through the trees, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. When the temperature started to drop and our breath began to mist in the cool air, we headed inside to warm up by the wood stove. We lit several candles around the main room, creating a warm, flickering ambience. Jake put on some acoustic music through a portable Bluetooth speaker, and we spent the next hour or so sitting at the old wooden table, tying fishing flies. Jake's really into fly fishing and has been trying to teach me the craft. So he'd brought his vise, various feathers, threads, and hooks. We were just sitting there, chatting about life while working on some classic patterns like woolly buggers and elk hair caddies. Right around midnight, we were winding down, just about to clean up the tools and materials scattered across the table, when it happened. 3 loud, deliberate slams hit the back door of the cabin. Bang, bang, bang. We both froze instantly. That total body freeze where you feel every hair on your arm stand up and your breath catch in your throat. Each impact made the entire door shudder violently in its frame, the sound echoing through the small cabin like gunshots. This wasn't an animal brushing past or bumping into something. This felt purposeful, aggressive, like something was demanding entry. Then, without any warning or low battery notification, the Bluetooth speaker suddenly cut out. No disconnection sound, no fade out, just complete silence. The speaker had been fully charged when we started using it earlier that evening. Jake's old golden retriever Max, who'd been lying peacefully by the wood stove, immediately stood up and locked his gaze on the back door. He didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't make any sound at all. He just stared with an intensity I'd never seen from him before, his ears forward and his body rigid with attention. Then everything outside went completely silent. I mean dead quiet. No wind rustling through the branches. No insects chirping. No distant sounds of wildlife moving through the forest. Just that heavy, ringing stillness that you feel more than hear. The kind of oppressive silence that puts your gut on edge and makes your skin crawl. After what felt like a solid minute, but was probably only seconds, Jake whispered urgently, "Did you lock the back door?" I had locked it, but we still grabbed one of the shotguns and a powerful LED flashlight. Moving as quietly as possible, we checked every door and window in the cabin, testing locks and peering out into the darkness. We saw nothing but trees, shadows, and that awful feeling like something was just beyond the reach of our light, watching and waiting. At one point, while we were sweeping the flashlight beam across the tree line behind the cabin, we both saw something move. Not a clear shape or a recognizable form, just motion stepping quickly out of the beam before we could focus on it. Like whatever it was had been deliberately avoiding the light, timing its movements to stay hidden. It could have been nothing, our eyes playing tricks on us in the darkness. But it could have been something, and that possibility made our blood run cold. We ended up sleeping in the loft area, both shotguns within easy reach, barely saying a word to each other. There were no more sounds, no more knocks, just hours of tense silence while we lay awake listening for any sign of movement outside. Every small sound, every settling board in the cabin, every distant crack of a branch made us hold our breath. Around 5:30 in the morning, the woods slowly started coming back to life. A few crickets began their morning songs, followed by the distant calls of various birds greeting the dawn. That's when we finally exhaled and allowed ourselves to relax slightly. In the clear light of morning, we decided to investigate the back door area thoroughly. What we found made our blood run cold all over again. There was a deep, significant dent in the metal back door. Positioned low to the ground like something man-sized had struck it with tremendous force. The door jamb was cracked too, the wood splintered and damaged from the impact. Despite our thorough search of the area, there were no footprints in the dirt, no disturbed ground, no broken branches or other signs of a struggle. It was as if whatever had hit our door had appeared and disappeared without leaving any trace of its presence. We also checked the motion-activated trail camera that Jake's family keeps positioned to monitor the main entrance to the property. Strangely, it had shut off sometime during the night, even though the batteries were completely fine, and it had been working perfectly the day before. We packed up our gear and left pretty quickly after that discovery. We didn't even bother with breakfast, just tossed everything into Jake's truck and got out of there as fast as we could. The drive down the winding forest road felt longer than usual, and neither of us spoke much until we reached the main highway. I've been back to that cabin since then, but only with a larger group of people. There's safety in numbers, and I'll admit that whatever happened that night shook my confidence about being isolated in deep wilderness areas. Jake's dad eventually replaced the damaged door, but he kept the dented metal panel as a conversation piece. When I asked him about it, he said he'd seen a thing or two out there over the years, but he wasn't willing to elaborate further. The way he said it, with that distant look in his eyes, made me think that our experience wasn't unique. To this day, I have no idea what was outside our cabin that night. The rational part of my mind wants to believe it was just a large animal, maybe a confused bear or elk. But the deliberate nature of those knocks, the way our electronics malfunctioned, and the complete absence of any tracks or evidence suggests something far more mysterious and unsettling. Whatever it was, I hope I never encounter it again. The Midnight Call. A small town cop's fight against a deadly conspiracy. The emergency call pierced through the winter silence at 11:47 p.m. A child's voice, unnaturally calm for someone so young, spoke into the darkness. "My grandpa fell down and won't get up. There's blood everywhere, and he's not moving." Officer David Martinez gripped his steering wheel harder as his patrol car fought through the relentless snowstorm that had been battering Pine Valley for 3 days straight. The dispatcher had confirmed the caller was a 6-year-old boy, alone with his unconscious grandfather in a house at the edge of town. David's headlights cut through the swirling white chaos, illuminating the Stevens residence, where only one window glowed with a flickering yellow light. The front door hung open, swaying in the howling wind like a warning. "Police department," David called out, his hand instinctively hovering near his holster. From the shadows emerged a small figure clutching a battered stuffed elephant, his face streaked with tears, yet composed beyond his years. "He's in the living room," the child whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm. David followed tiny footprints across the pristine carpet, then stopped cold. Beyond the elderly man crumpled on the hardwood floor, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A trail of blood droplets led toward the basement stairs, and fresh scratches marked the back door's lock. The boy tugged at David's uniform sleeve. "The bad people were here again," he said matter-of-factly. "Grandpa told me to hide when they come, but I heard him fall." Pine Valley, Montana, had once thrived as a copper mining town, but decades of economic decline had reduced it to a collection of weathered buildings, huddled against the unforgiving Rocky Mountain winters. This particular season had brought the worst blizzard in living memory, transforming the community into an isolated island surrounded by impassable roads and downed power lines. It was exactly the kind of place where secrets could remain buried for years, until circumstances forced them into the light. Officer David Martinez knew every street and shortcut in Pine Valley. At 41, his once optimistic face had been weathered by loss and disappointment. 4 years had passed since the drunk driver had taken his wife Maria and their unborn daughter, but time had done little to heal those wounds. He still wore his wedding ring, a small act of defiance against a world that seemed determined to strip away everything he held dear. The ring caught the light as he knelt beside the unconscious man, checking for vital signs. The Stevens house sat isolated at the town's northern edge, partially hidden by towering pine trees that groaned under their burden of snow. Frank Stevens, a 70-year-old former Navy medic with a reputation for privacy, had moved there 6 years ago with his grandson after a family tragedy no one in town fully understood. Neighbors described Frank as meticulous, the kind of man who checked his doors 3 times before bed and kept his curtains drawn even during daylight hours. His military bearing remained evident in his straight posture and precisely trimmed gray beard, though his recent heart condition had begun to slow his determined stride. Little Tommy Stevens was known around town as the serious one. 6 years old with intense brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything around him. His chronic asthma kept him indoors during harsh weather, and his rescue inhaler was as much a part of him as his ever-present stuffed elephant, worn smooth by countless nights of comfort. Few people in Pine Valley had ever met Tommy's parents, Michael and Lisa Stevens, who were said to work overseas for some kind of consulting firm that required frequent travel. Police Chief Sarah Williams ran her department with military precision. A tall woman with prematurely silver hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She had little patience for what she called emotional police work. Her office walls displayed commendations and certificates rather than family photographs, and she treated every case as a potential threat to the department's carefully maintained reputation. Amanda Foster from Child Protective Services juggled too many cases with insufficient resources and support. Her compassion remained intact despite the system's relentless efforts to bury it beneath endless paperwork and bureaucratic obstacles. She had worked with David Martinez on several previous cases, developing a cautious but genuine professional respect for his dedication to protecting children. These lives were about to collide in ways none of them could have anticipated. As the storm outside mirrored the chaos about to engulf their small community, David knelt beside Frank Stevens' motionless form, pressing 2 fingers against the old man's neck. The pulse was there, weak and irregular, but present. Blood had matted the silver hair where Frank's head had struck the corner of the stone fireplace. The living room itself was immaculate, except for the crimson stain spreading across the polished hardwood floor, unnervingly bright under the overhead chandelier. "Tommy, how long has your grandpa been like this?" David asked, keeping his voice gentle as he reached for his radio to call for medical assistance. The boy clutched his stuffed elephant tighter, its worn fabric damp with tears. "I was upstairs reading when I heard a big crash. When I came down, Grandpa was already on the floor like this." His voice carried an unnatural steadiness for a child his age, as if he had been trained for such emergencies. "Dispatch, this is Officer Martinez. I need an ambulance at 1423 Mountain View Drive. Elderly male, head trauma, unconscious but breathing." Static crackled back at him. "Officer Martinez, ambulance dispatch reports at least 45 minutes due to road conditions. Snow plows can't reach your sector until morning." David cursed under his breath, then glanced at Tommy, hoping the boy hadn't heard. "Copy that. Send them as soon as possible. I'll provide first aid until they arrive." He turned back to Tommy, who stood watching with those unnervingly adult eyes. "Do you know where your grandpa keeps his medical supplies?" "A first aid kit." "In the bathroom closet upstairs." "I'll get it," the boy replied, disappearing up the staircase with surprising purpose and speed. While Tommy was gone, David took the opportunity to examine the living room more carefully. Something felt wrong beyond the obvious injury. The back door's deadbolt showed fresh scratch marks around the keyhole, as if someone had been attempting to pick the lock. The window above the kitchen sink had been reinforced with what appeared to be recently installed metal security bars. On the refrigerator, a child's drawing showed a house with stick figures inside, and dark shapes lurking in the surrounding trees, watching from the shadows. Frank groaned softly, his eyelids fluttering. "Mr. Stevens, can you hear me? This is Officer Martinez from the Pine Valley Police." The old man's eyes opened, unfocused and clouded with pain and confusion. "Tommy," he whispered urgently. "Where's Tommy? Is he safe?" "He's safe, sir. He's getting the first aid kit to help you." Frank's hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping David's wrist with desperate intensity. "The documents," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "They want the documents. Don't let them get Tommy." His eyes rolled back as consciousness slipped away again. Tommy returned with a comprehensive military-style medical kit, far more extensive than the typical household first aid supply. David cleaned and bandaged Frank's head wound as thoroughly as possible, then covered the old man with a thick blanket from the nearby sofa. "Tommy, I need to look around the house to make sure everything is secure. Is that okay with you?" The boy nodded solemnly, his small face grave. "Are you looking for the bad people?" A chill ran down David's spine that had nothing to do with the winter cold seeping through the walls. "What bad people, Tommy?" "The ones who watch our house at night. Grandpa says I should go to my special hiding place when they come." He pointed to the drawing on the refrigerator. "I drew them in my picture. See how they hide in the trees." David studied the childish illustration more carefully. The dark figures lurking outside the house could be interpreted as wearing uniforms or business suits, their shapes deliberately menacing. "Have these people been inside your house before, Tommy?" The boy shrugged, a gesture painfully adult on such small shoulders. "Sometimes I hear footsteps on the porch at night. Grandpa says it's just the wind or maybe deer, but I know it's not. Can you show me this special hiding place your grandpa told you about?" Tommy hesitated, glancing at his grandfather's still form with obvious worry. "Grandpa says I'm only supposed to show good people, people who want to help us. I'm a police officer, Tommy. My job is to help good people and stop bad ones from hurting them." After a moment's consideration, Tommy nodded. "Okay, but first I need to get Mr. Peanuts." He patted his stuffed elephant affectionately. "And my breathing medicine. Grandpa says I should always take it when I'm scared or worried." David followed Tommy to his bedroom, a surprisingly normal child's space with dinosaur posters covering the walls and a bookshelf filled with picture books and educational materials. The boy retrieved his rescue inhaler from the nightstand, then hesitated. "Can I check on Grandpa first? I want to make sure he's still breathing okay." They returned to the living room where Frank remained unconscious, but breathing steadily. David had positioned him in the recovery position, careful of his head wound and potential neck injury. "He's going to be all right, isn't he?" Tommy's voice finally cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath his composed exterior. "The doctors are going to take very good care of him," David said, not wanting to make promises he couldn't keep. "Now, let's find that safe place where you can wait until the ambulance comes." As they turned to leave the living room, David noticed something partially hidden under the antique sofa, visible only from their current angle. The unmistakable outline of a handgun, not unusual in rural Montana. But its placement suggested it had been positioned for quick access during an emergency. The living room revealed additional oddities that spoke to Frank Stevens' deep paranoia, or legitimate fear. Extra deadbolts had been installed on every door. Windows were covered with heavy blackout curtains even during daylight hours, and a police scanner hummed quietly in the corner, constantly monitoring emergency frequencies. This wasn't just the home of a cautious, elderly man. It was a fortress designed to keep the outside world at bay. "Tommy, does your grandpa have any friends who visit regularly? Anyone who checks on you both?" The boy shook his head definitively. "Just Dr. Peterson sometimes when Grandpa's heart acts up. And Mr. Davidson brings groceries when the weather's too bad for us to go to town. But Grandpa always says we don't talk to strangers about family business, ever." David's radio crackled again. "Martinez, what's your status? Roads are getting worse, and we're getting reports of downed power lines blocking several routes. Still waiting on the ambulance. Patient is stable for now. Child is unharmed. Possible signs of paranoid behavior in the home. Requesting background check on Frank Stevens when communications improve." "Copy that. Chief Williams wants to know if you need backup." David glanced at Tommy, who was gently adjusting his grandfather's blanket with practiced care that suggested this wasn't his first experience with medical emergencies. "Negative. Situation is under control. Just get that ambulance here as soon as the road's clear." Tommy tugged at David's sleeve. "I want to show you my special place now." He led David to a hallway closet and pointed to what appeared to be a solid back wall. "My hiding spot is behind there." David examined the wall carefully, finding an almost invisible seam. A gentle push revealed a small hidden room, just large enough for a child to hide in comfortably. It was stocked with bottled water, energy bars, a powerful flashlight, and a small two-way radio. "Grandpa says if the bad people ever find me, I should press this red button." Tommy pointed to a small emergency beacon on the radio. "But only if it's really, really dangerous, because it calls for help from very far away." The wail of distant sirens finally cut through the howling wind outside. David felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was tempered by growing unease about what had really happened in this house tonight. Was Frank Stevens' fall truly an accident, or something more sinister? And who were these mysterious watchers that had a 6-year-old child hiding in secret rooms? As the paramedics struggled through the snow-choked driveway, David made a silent promise to the frightened boy clutching his stuffed elephant. He would find out the truth about what was happening to this family, no matter where that investigation might lead. The hospital corridor reeked of antiseptic and bitter coffee. David Martinez sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair, his uniform still stained with Frank Stevens' blood. Across from him, Tommy had finally succumbed to exhaustion, his small body curled awkwardly in the oversized chair, with his stuffed elephant pressed against his chest. The boy's breathing occasionally hitched, a combination of his chronic asthma and emotional exhaustion from the night's trauma. "Officer Martinez." David looked up to see Dr. Jennifer Hayes approaching, her white coat wrinkled from a long shift and dark circles under her tired eyes. She gestured for him to follow her a few steps away from the sleeping child. "How is he, Doc?" David asked quietly. Dr. Hayes' expression was grave as she consulted her clipboard. "The head injury is serious but treatable. We're preparing him for surgery to relieve some swelling, but there's something else." She hesitated, lowering her voice further. "His blood work shows signs of digitalis toxicity." "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning someone has been deliberately tampering with his heart medication, administering doses well above therapeutic levels over an extended period." "This wasn't an accident, Officer Martinez." David felt the floor seem to shift beneath him. Are you saying someone was trying to poison him? I'm saying his fall tonight was likely caused by cardiac arrhythmia from medication poisoning. And that doesn't happen by mistake. She glanced toward Tommy's sleeping form. There's more. During my examination, I noticed bruising on the boy's arms and back. Some fresh, some older. You think Frank was abusing him? David couldn't reconcile that possibility with what he'd observed of their relationship. Dr. Hayes shook her head firmly. The pattern isn't consistent with that type of abuse. It looks more like someone has been grabbing him roughly multiple times. Restraint injuries, not punishment injuries. She handed David a manila folder. Tommy's medical history shows 3 hospital visits in the past 18 months, each at different facilities. Each time, different names were given for the accompanying adult. David flipped through the pages, a cold weight settling in his stomach like a stone. I need to make some calls. Is there anything else? One more thing that's troubling me, Dr. Hayes said, her voice dropping even lower. When I asked Tommy about his parents, he told me they're on a secret mission overseas. He said they call sometimes, but only when the phone lines are safe. Officer Martinez, something very strange is happening with this family. As Dr. Hayes was called away to prepare for Frank's surgery, David dialed the police station. This is Martinez. I need everything we have on Frank Stevens and run the names Michael and Lisa Stevens, supposedly the boy's parents. While waiting for a response, David returned to his seat beside Tommy. The boy stirred, blinking up at him with red-rimmed eyes filled with confusion and fear. Is Grandpa going to be okay? The doctors are helping him right now, David said gently. They're very good at what they do, and they're going to take excellent care of him. Tommy sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. I'm really hungry. My tummy feels empty. In the hospital cafeteria, David watched Tommy methodically separate his sandwich into precise quarters before eating each piece slowly and deliberately. The boy's movements were ritualistic, almost compulsive, suggesting deep-seated anxiety and need for control. Tommy, can I ask you some questions about your home life? David said carefully. The child nodded, chewing thoughtfully. I guess so. Those bruises on your arms that the doctor noticed, how did you get them? Tommy's eyes darted around the mostly empty cafeteria, nervously. I'm not supposed to talk about home stuff with strangers. I'm a police officer, remember. Part of my job is making sure children are safe and protected. Tommy seemed to weigh this information carefully, his young face serious. Sometimes Grandpa has to hide me really quick when the watchers come to our house. He doesn't mean to squeeze my arms too hard when he's scared. These watchers, are they the same bad people you told me about earlier? The boy nodded solemnly. They don't know about my special hiding place yet. Grandpa says that's the only reason I'm still safe. David's phone buzzed with a text message from the station. Stevens, Frank, age 70. Former Navy medic. One arrest in 1996 for fraud charges, later dropped. Current address 1423 Mountain View Drive. Property purchased with cash 6 years ago. No record of Michael or Lisa Stevens as residents. We'll keep searching. Tommy, when did you last see your mom and dad? The boy's face scrunched up in concentration. Last Christmas, I think. They called on Grandpa's special secure phone and sang happy birthday to me even though it wasn't my birthday. Where do your parents work? They help rescue people who are in danger. That's all I'm allowed to know about it. He lowered his voice to a whisper. "It's classified information." David was about to ask another question when a sharp voice cut through the cafeteria's quiet atmosphere. "Officer Martinez." Police Chief Sarah Williams strode toward them. Her silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin around her eyes. Behind her walked a tired-looking woman, carrying a worn leather briefcase. "Chief," David acknowledged, standing respectfully. "We need to talk. Now." Williams gestured toward a corner table away from Tommy. The woman with the briefcase stayed with the boy, introducing herself with a gentle smile as Amanda Foster from Child Protective Services. Once they were out of earshot, Williams' professionally neutral expression hardened into something resembling anger. "What exactly do you think you're doing here, Martinez?" "My job, responding to an emergency call and following up on suspicious circumstances. By interrogating a 6-year-old child without guardian consent or CPS supervision." David felt heat rising in his neck. "With all due respect, Chief, that boy's guardian is unconscious and possibly the victim of attempted murder. There are clear signs of a child in potential danger, and I was gathering information to protect him." Williams' eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're overreaching, Martinez. This is a simple domestic accident. Elderly man falls, hits his head. Happens every day in this country. Dr. Hayes found evidence of deliberate poisoning, and the boy has unexplained injuries consistent with being forcibly restrained. Dr. Hayes has a documented history of seeing abuse where none exists. Don't make this personal, Martinez." "Personal? What's that supposed to mean?" "I know that since Maria died, you've been looking for people to save. Looking for purpose where there isn't any. But this isn't it." David's hands clenched into fists. "Leave my wife out of this." Williams sighed, her expression softening slightly. "CPS will handle the situation from here. You're too emotionally involved to remain objective. Go home, get some rest. That's an order." David watched helplessly as Williams returned to the table where Amanda was showing Tommy how to make paper airplanes from napkins. The chief spoke briefly to the social worker, then left without looking back at David. Amanda approached him with professional sympathy evident in her tired eyes. "I've been assigned to Tommy's case. We'll need to place him in emergency foster care until his grandfather's condition stabilizes." "Amanda, something's not right here. The house was fortified like a bunker. The boy talks about watchers and has a hidden panic room. Frank Stevens mentioned documents before he lost consciousness." She glanced over her shoulder to make sure Tommy was still occupied with his paper creations. "David, you know I take these concerns seriously. I'll look into it thoroughly, but carefully." Chief Williams seems unusually interested in classifying this as a routine accident. "I need to check something at the Stevens house. The boy's medication, his medical records." Amanda hesitated. "I can delay the placement process for a few hours, but be careful. And call me immediately if you find anything concerning." Back at the Stevens residence, the scene felt different in daylight. Snow had continued to drift against the porch, undisturbed except for the paramedics' footprints from hours earlier. David used the spare key Tommy had told him about, hidden inside a fake rock in the garden that looked authentic but felt hollow. The house was eerily silent, the living room floor still stained with dried blood despite David's earlier efforts to clean it. He went directly to Tommy's room to find the boy's asthma medication and any other medical supplies that might provide clues. In the bathroom cabinet, David found Tommy's rescue inhaler along with several prescription bottles bearing labels from different pharmacies across 3 states. Some had Frank's name. Others were prescribed to names David didn't recognize. The medications included not just heart pills and asthma treatments, but also anxiety medications and sleeping aids. As he was preparing to leave, something caught his attention. A loose floorboard in Tommy's closet, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Using a small pry bar from Frank's toolbox, David lifted the board to reveal a metal strongbox hidden beneath. Inside the locked box, which he opened using a key found taped under Frank's nightstand drawer, David discovered items that made his blood run cold. Multiple USB drives, a handgun with the serial numbers filed off, and several sets of identification documents. Passports showing Frank Stevens, but also Frank Mitchell, Frank Peterson, and other aliases, all with his photograph. More disturbing were passports for Michael and Lisa Stevens under different surnames, all bearing their photos. Another passport showed Tommy's serious face under the name Thomas Winter. Beneath the identification documents was a manila envelope containing photographs that made David's hands tremble. Michael and Lisa Stevens stood with a group of men in unmarked tactical gear beside military vehicles. Another photo showed the same group with a man David recognized from news reports, a defense contractor who had been implicated in an arms-dealing scandal 3 years earlier. David's phone rang, startling him from his examination of the evidence. Amanda's voice was tense and urgent. "David, get back to the hospital immediately." Frank Stevens went into cardiac arrest during surgery, and someone tried to access his room earlier. A man claiming to be FBI, but his identification was suspicious. Hospital security is reviewing the surveillance footage now. "I'm on my way." David gathered the contents of the strongbox. Whatever was happening here, the answers wouldn't be found in Pine Valley's small-town police database. Frank Stevens and his family were running from something or someone with significant resources and reach. And now David Martinez was squarely in their crosshairs. The surgical waiting room was nearly deserted when David arrived, still clutching the manila envelope from Frank's hidden strongbox. A television mounted in the corner silently displayed weather updates, another storm system moving in with promises of more isolated roads and communication disruptions. David checked his watch. 6:43 a.m. He'd been awake for over 24 hours, running on nothing but black coffee and mounting anxiety about what he'd stumbled into. Dr. Hayes emerged through the surgical suite doors, her mask dangling around her neck. The exhaustion etched on her face told David everything before she spoke a word. "We managed to stabilize him, but it was extremely close. Someone has definitely been tampering with his medication over an extended period. The toxicity levels are too precise and consistent to be accidental." She rubbed her eyes wearily. "He's in recovery now, heavily sedated. His heart rhythm is stable, but weak. When will he be able to talk? I need to ask him some questions that could be crucial. Maybe by this evening, but he won't be fully coherent. Whatever you need to ask him might have to wait until tomorrow or longer." She studied David's haggard appearance. "You look terrible. When did you last sleep or eat a proper meal?" David ignored the question. Where's Tommy now? With the social worker in the children's ward. They're keeping him there until permanent placement arrangements can be made. Dr. Hayes lowered her voice. About that security incident I mentioned on the phone. Hospital security caught the whole thing on surveillance cameras. A man in an expensive suit claimed to be federal law enforcement. But when they asked for additional verification and backup identification, he disappeared. The security chief is keeping it quiet for now, but he's concerned. David nodded his thanks and headed for the children's ward. He found Amanda sitting outside a colorful playroom, watching through a large glass partition as Tommy methodically stacked wooden blocks with two other children. Despite his participation in the activity, the boy seemed detached, going through motions rather than genuinely engaging in play. Classic signs of a child under severe chronic stress, Amanda said softly as David sat beside her. Hypervigilance, difficulty connecting with others, ritualistic behaviors for self-comfort. I found these at the house. David discreetly showed her the passports and photographs, multiple identities for the entire family, and look at these pictures. Amanda examined them carefully, her professional composure cracking as she realized the implications. David, what have you gotten yourself into? This looks like something from a spy movie. I'm not sure yet, but it's serious enough that someone has been systematically poisoning an old man and terrorizing a 6-year-old child. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Have you been able to find any official records of Michael and Lisa Stevens? Amanda opened her laptop computer. I've been searching all morning. According to official records, they work for a consulting company called Blackwater Solutions. But when I called to verify their employment, the receptionist claimed she'd never heard of them. The company supposedly specializes in international security consulting, whatever that actually means. Shell company, almost certainly, and here's where it gets even stranger. Amanda pulled up another screen. Their listed home address doesn't exist. It's supposedly a residential address in Denver, but it's actually a vacant lot that's been empty for over 10 years. David watched Tommy through the glass partition. The boy was now drawing with intense concentration, his small face screwed up with the effort. What about other family members? Grandparents, aunts, uncles? None listed anywhere. Frank Stevens is Tommy's only emergency contact at school, his only listed guardian in medical records, his only connection to any kind of normal life. Amanda hesitated. David, I need to place him in foster care today. It's required by state protocol, and I'm already stretching the rules by keeping him here this long. Give me 24 hours to figure this out. I can't. Chief Williams has been calling my supervisor every hour, putting pressure on me to process this as a standard case of an elderly guardian with health issues. She's presenting it as completely routine. David felt a flash of deep suspicion. Why was Williams so determined to treat this situation as routine when everything about it screamed danger and conspiracy? Let me talk to Tommy first, please. Inside the playroom, David sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor beside Tommy, who was coloring with unusual precision for a child his age. The drawing showed a house with small figures inside, and what appeared to be men in dark clothing surrounding the building from all sides. That's a very detailed picture, David said gently. Can you tell me about it? Tommy didn't look up from his careful coloring. It's our house, And those are the shadow people who watch us. Do these shadow people have names? The boy shrugged. Grandpa calls them different things. Sometimes he uses words I'm not supposed to repeat. Despite everything, David smiled. Your grandpa sounds pretty brave, standing up to shadow people. He's the bravest person in the whole world, Tommy said matter-of-factly. He was a soldier who saved people when they got hurt in wars. He has medals in a box under his bed. Tommy, I need to ask you something very important. Your mom and dad, when exactly did you last see them in person? The boy's crayon stilled in his hand. Christmas, but it was a different Christmas, not on the real day. What do you mean by that? We had Christmas in October because Mommy and Daddy had to go away again on their work trip. Grandpa made a turkey dinner and we opened presents. His voice dropped to a whisper. Mommy was crying when she hugged me goodbye. She said she'd come back as soon as it was safe for families to be together again. David felt his chest tighten with emotion. Do you know where they went? Tommy shook his head. Grandpa said they're helping catch very bad people, but it's a secret mission, so I can't know the details. Does your grandpa have any friends who visit? Anyone else who checks on you both? Just Mr. Davidson sometimes. He brings us groceries when the snow is too deep for Grandpa's truck, and Dr. Peterson when Grandpa's heart acts funny. Tommy looked up suddenly, his eyes bright with hope. Is Grandpa awake yet? Can I see him? Not yet, buddy. The doctors are helping him rest so his body can heal properly. David glanced through the glass at Amanda, who was checking her watch with obvious concern. Tommy, Miss Foster is going to take you to stay with a nice family for a little while, just until your grandpa feels better. Tommy's face hardened with a determination no 6-year-old should need to possess. No, I want to stay with you. David was taken aback. With me? Tommy, we barely know each other. Grandpa said if something bad ever happened, I should find someone with a badge who feels safe inside. The boy's eyes, startlingly mature, held David's gaze steadily. You feel safe. Please don't make me go with strangers. The shadow people might find me if I'm not with the right person. Before David could respond, Amanda entered the playroom. Time to go, Tommy. I found a really wonderful family for you to stay with. They have a dog named Copper and a big backyard for playing. David watched helplessly as Amanda gently led Tommy away, the boy looking back over his shoulder with silent pleading in his eyes. Something twisted painfully in David's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since Maria died. It was more than just professional concern for a crime victim. It was the profound recognition of a connection, a sense of responsibility and protection that went beyond duty. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Hayes. Frank, awake briefly, asked for you specifically, mentioned something called the Blackwater Files. Does that mean anything to you? David headed for the recovery ward, his mind racing through everything he'd learned. Blackwater Solutions, multiple identities, shadow people watching the house, a file someone was willing to kill for, and a 6-year-old boy who had already lost everything that mattered to him. All the pieces were connected, but he still couldn't see the complete picture. A nurse stopped him at the entrance to Frank's room. Family only, I'm afraid. David flashed his badge. Police business. He specifically asked to see me. Frank Stevens lay motionless against the white hospital sheets, tubes and wires connecting him to quietly beeping machines that monitored his fragile vital signs. His weathered face was pale as paper. but his eyes fluttered open as David approached the bed. "Tommy," Frank's voice was barely a whisper. "He's safe," David assured him immediately. "Child Protective Services has him, but someone tried to get into your room during surgery." Frank's gaze sharpened with alarm despite his medication. "Same people who have been watching the house. I found the passports, Frank, the photos. I know you and your family have been hiding from someone powerful, and I know about Blackwater Solutions." Frank closed his eyes, a single tear sliding down his weathered cheek. "Then you're in as much danger as we are now. Tell me what's happening. Let me help you and Tommy." Frank's breathing was labored, each word requiring tremendous effort. "Michael and Lisa, not on business trips." David leaned closer, dreading what he was about to hear. "Where are they, Frank?" "Dead," the word hung in the sterile air like a physical presence. "Car accident last winter. Wasn't an accident." David felt as if the floor had collapsed beneath him. "Tommy doesn't know, does he?" Frank shook his head weakly. Couldn't tell him. Already lost his parents. Couldn't take away his hope, too. "Who killed them? Who's been after you and Tommy?" "Blackwater arms dealers, terrorists." Michael found proof, files. Frank's voice faded as the medication pulled him back toward unconsciousness. "Safety deposit box, First National Bank. Key is hidden in Tommy's elephant." His eyes closed, breathing evening out into medicated sleep. David checked the corridor before gently squeezing Frank's hand. "I'll protect him. I promise you that." Outside the hospital, David sat in his patrol car, mind racing with the implications of what he'd learned. He needed to see those files, but Tommy's stuffed elephant had gone with him to the foster placement. David called Amanda. "I need to know where you placed Tommy." "David, you know I can't tell you that. It's confidential information." "His parents are dead, Amanda. Murdered. Whoever killed them is still hunting Tommy, and now they know we're involved." Silence stretched across the phone connection. Finally, Amanda's voice came back, tight with concern. "The Hendersons, 1542 Lakeview Drive. But David, if you're right about this, you could be putting them in danger just by going there. I'm calling for backup. We need to get Tommy and that evidence somewhere secure." 25 minutes later, David pulled up to a modest 2-story home at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The Henderson house sat surrounded by snow-laden pine trees, looking peaceful and welcoming in the afternoon sunlight. But as David approached the front door, something made him pause and take notice. The house was too quiet. No sounds of children playing, no lights visible from within despite the darkening winter sky. David's instincts, honed by 15 years of police work, screamed danger. Hand resting on his holster, David circled around to the back of the house. The kitchen door stood slightly open, swinging gently in the cold breeze. He drew his weapon and entered silently. The kitchen was immaculate, no signs of struggle, but also no signs of life. A pot of soup sat on the stove, still warm, and half-eaten sandwiches rested on plates at the dining table, as if the family had been interrupted mid-meal. "Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Henderson." "This is Officer Martinez," David called out softly, moving cautiously through the house. In the living room, he found Janet Henderson seated rigidly in an armchair, her eyes wide with terror. A man in a dark suit stood behind her, his hand resting meaningfully on her shoulder in a gesture that was clearly a threat. "Officer Martinez, we've been expecting you," the man said, his voice calm and professional. "Please lower your weapon. We don't want anyone to get hurt unnecessarily." "Where's Tommy? Where's Mr. Henderson?" David kept his gun trained on the intruder. The suit nodded toward the staircase. "Robert is upstairs with the boy. Both are unharmed for now. We simply want to discuss the Blackwater files. We know Frank Stevens shared information with you. You're the ones who have been poisoning an old man and terrorizing a child. Some negotiation tactic. Regrettable but necessary measures in an urgent national security situation. You're dealing with forces beyond your understanding, Officer Martinez. Give us what we want, and everyone walks away from this safely. I don't have any files, but you know where they are." The man's grip tightened on Janet Henderson's shoulder, making her whimper in fear. "The boy told us about his special elephant. Very cooperative child. Once we explained that his grandfather's continued health depended on his helpfulness." Rage surged through David at the thought of these men threatening a 6-year-old. "You monsters threatened a child whose parents are already dead. We had a civilized conversation. Now you and I are having one. Where is the stuffed animal?" A sound from upstairs interrupted the standoff. A thump, followed by muffled shouting. The suit glanced up momentarily, and that split second of distraction was all David needed. He fired a warning shot into the ceiling and lunged forward, tackling the man away from Janet Henderson. They crashed into the coffee table, glass shattering across the hardwood floor. The intruder was professionally trained, his counterattacks precise and brutal. A vicious punch to David's kidney sent searing pain through his side. David slammed his forehead into the man's nose, feeling cartilage crunch satisfyingly. "Run!" he shouted to Janet, who fled toward the front door. Upstairs, more chaos erupted. David could hear Robert Henderson shouting, followed by what sounded like Tommy screaming in terror. The momentary distraction cost him, as the suited man slammed David's head against the hardwood floor, stars exploding across his vision. As the intruder reached inside his jacket for what was certainly a weapon, headlights swept across the living room windows. A car door slammed outside, followed by the sound of running footsteps. "Police, everyone out with your hands visible." David recognized the voice of Officer Mike Chen, his backup finally arriving. The suited man hesitated, then rolled away from David and sprinted toward the back door. David staggered to his feet, head spinning, and raced upstairs. In the guest bedroom, he found Robert Henderson unconscious on the floor, a nasty bruise forming on his temple. The window stood wide open, curtains billowing in the frigid night air. On the windowsill, David could see a small footprint in the snow. Looking out, he spotted a second man in a dark suit carrying a struggling Tommy toward a black SUV parked on the side street. The boy clutched his stuffed elephant, kicking and fighting with everything his small body could muster. Without hesitation, David climbed through the window onto the sloped roof. The icy shingles offered no traction whatsoever. He slid rather than ran, tumbling over the edge and landing hard in a snowbank below. Pain lanced through his ankle, but adrenaline pushed the injury aside. David lurched to his feet, drawing his weapon again. "Stop, police!" The suited man turned, using Tommy as a human shield. "Stay back, officer. We don't want to hurt the boy, but we will if necessary." Tommy's eyes locked with David's, wide with terror, but also something else. Recognition. Trust. The boy suddenly went completely limp, dropping his full weight downward. As the man struggled to hold him, Tommy bit down hard on his captor's hand. The momentary distraction was enough. David tackled them both, twisting his body to absorb the impact as they hit the snow-covered ground. He rolled away with Tommy in his arms as Mike Chen rounded the corner of the house, weapon drawn. Police on the ground now. The suited man weighed his options, then slowly raised his hands in surrender. As Mike moved in to handcuff him, the man spoke quietly to David. "This isn't over, Martinez. You have no idea what forces you're dealing with. This goes much higher than you can imagine." "Maybe not," David replied, holding Tommy close. "But I know what side I'm on." After securing the scene and calling for medical assistance for Robert Henderson, David sat with Tommy in the back of his patrol car. Emergency lights painted the snow in alternating red and blue patterns, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. "You were incredibly brave," David told the boy, who hadn't spoken since the rescue. "Are you hurt anywhere?" Tommy shook his head, clutching his stuffed elephant with white-knuckled intensity. "They said they would hurt Grandpa more if I didn't tell them where Mommy and Daddy hid the special papers." David chose his next words very carefully. "Tommy, did your grandpa ever talk to you about your parents maybe not being able to come back home?" The boy's eyes filled with tears, but his voice remained steady with heartbreaking maturity. "I know they're not coming back. I heard Grandpa crying on the phone one night. He said, 'How do I tell a little boy that his whole family is gone?' But I pretended I didn't hear because it made him too sad." David pulled the boy into a gentle hug, feeling small arms wrap around his neck with desperate strength. "Why didn't you say anything to him?" "Because if I kept pretending they were just away on work trips, it didn't hurt so much. And Grandpa didn't have to feel bad about not telling me the truth." Over Tommy's shoulder, David watched as more police cars arrived, followed by an unmarked black sedan. Chief Williams stepped out, her face thunderous as she surveyed the scene with obvious displeasure. "You're in serious trouble, Martinez," she snapped, approaching the patrol car. "Interfering with CPS placement, discharging your weapon in a residential area, unauthorized investigation." "Saving a child from kidnapping," David interrupted. "These men threatened the Henderson family and attempted to abduct Tommy. Ask Officer Chen, he witnessed the whole thing." Williams glanced at the handcuffed man being loaded into another patrol car. "That man is a federal agent, Martinez, Department of Homeland Security. Then why did he run when backup arrived? Why not identify himself properly from the beginning?" David kept his arm protectively around Tommy. "Something stinks about this whole situation, Chief, and I'm starting to wonder why you're so eager to sweep it under the rug." Williams' eyes narrowed dangerously. "Watch yourself, Officer Martinez. You're already facing suspension for reckless conduct. For doing my job, for protecting a child." Before Williams could respond, Amanda Foster arrived, rushing to David's side with obvious concern. "Tommy, are you all right?" She shot an accusatory glance at the chief. "I placed him with the Hendersons less than 4 hours ago. How did these men find him so quickly?" The implication hung in the air like a physical presence. Someone had leaked the placement information, and there were only a few people who had access to that data. Williams' face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in her jaw. "We'll investigate all aspects of this incident thoroughly. In the meantime, the boy needs secure placement." "He stays with me," David said firmly. Absolutely not. You're emotionally compromised and possibly facing disciplinary action. Amanda stepped forward with unexpected authority. Actually, in emergency situations where a child's safety is at immediate risk, I have discretionary authority for temporary placement. Given the circumstances, I'm authorizing emergency placement with Officer Martinez for 72 hours. Williams looked like she might argue, then thought better of it with so many witnesses present. 72 hours. Then we reevaluate everything. She turned on her heel and walked away, her entire posture radiating barely controlled anger. In the days that followed, David maintained a constant vigil at Frank's hospital bedside, while Tommy slept on a cot nearby, refusing to be separated from either of them. The stuffed elephant never left the boy's arms, and David had carefully examined it to find a small tear in the seam along its back. Inside was a safe deposit box key with a number etched on it, 479. Mike Chen, who had taken personal leave to help guard Frank and Tommy, shook his head in disbelief when David showed him the key. You realize we're going up against people with serious resources and connections, right? The man we arrested isn't talking, and Homeland Security is claiming he was a rogue agent operating without authorization. We need what's in that safe deposit box, David said. It's the only leverage we have, and it's the reason they'll keep coming after Tommy. David looked over at Tommy, who was showing Frank a drawing he'd made. The three of them stood together in front of a house, with no shadow people anywhere in sight. The old man was still weak, but improving daily, his color returning and his voice growing stronger. Then we'd better make sure it's worth the risk, Mike replied quietly. News of the incident at the Henderson home spread through Pine Valley like wildfire. The community, initially suspicious of the reclusive Stevens family, began to rally around them. Neighbors organized meal trains for when Frank would be released from the hospital. Tommy's kindergarten teacher brought his favorite books to read during the long hospital stays. Even the gruff owner of the local diner showed up with homemade chicken soup, claiming it was his grandmother's recipe for healing. But as local support grew, so did the pressure from outside forces. Strange cars with out-of-state license plates appeared parked on various streets around town. David's apartment was broken into, though nothing appeared to be taken. The hospital reported multiple unauthorized attempts to access Frank's medical records through their computer system. Through it all, David found himself profoundly changed by the quiet strength of the small boy who now slept under his protection. Tommy's resilience in the face of devastating loss and constant danger humbled him. The child's complete trust was a gift David hadn't known he needed, and a responsibility he was determined to honor with his life, if necessary. Frank, growing stronger each day, watched the developing bond between them with knowing eyes. One evening, as Tommy slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, the old man reached for David's hand. "You're a good man, Martinez. You remind me of my son-in-law." His voice was stronger now, though still raspy from the breathing tube. Michael was just trying to do the right thing. He never imagined it would cost him and Lisa their lives. What exactly did he discover, Frank? The old man's eyes darted to the door, a habit of paranoia deeply ingrained after years of running. Proof that Blackwater was selling weapons to both sides in overseas conflicts. American weapons ending up in the hands of terrorists, while our own soldiers were being killed by the same equipment. And worse, they knew those weapons would be used against civilian populations. They calculated the profit margins against the potential scandal and decided the money was worth the risk. And the people hunting you now. Private contractors, deniable assets. If they're caught, there's no official connection to Blackwater or the government officials who protect them. Frank's hand trembled slightly. Michael trusted the system initially. He tried to report it through proper channels. 2 weeks later, their brakes failed on a mountain highway. David thought of the safe deposit box key hidden in his apartment and the files that could bring down an entire network of corruption. Frank, the files at the bank. What exactly do they contain? Everything: financial records, emails, photographs of weapons deliveries, names of everyone involved, including some very powerful people in Washington. Frank's eyes filled with tears. My daughter and son-in-law died for those files. I've been keeping them safe, waiting for the right time, the right person to trust with them. Why not go public immediately? Give everything to the press. We tried once. A reporter from the Denver Post ended up dead in what was ruled a random mugging gone wrong. After that, I focused entirely on keeping Tommy safe. He's all I have left of my family. David nodded, understanding at last the crushing weight of the burden Frank had carried alone for so long. You're not alone anymore. We'll finish what Michael started, but first we need to get you and Tommy somewhere truly safe. As he spoke, David realized he was making a promise that would forever alter the course of his life. It was a commitment to justice that might cost him his career, his reputation, even his life. Yet looking at the sleeping child and his exhausted grandfather, David knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. The storm outside had finally broken, moonlight streaming through the hospital window for the first time in days. For the first time since Maria's death, the hollow ache in David's chest felt slightly less overwhelming. Whatever came next, he would face it with renewed purpose. First National Bank stood like a fortress in downtown Pine Valley, its weathered brick facade a testament to more prosperous times when the mining industry had brought wealth to the region. David Martinez surveyed the building from his parked car across the street, fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, Mike Chen checked his service weapon for the third time, the metallic clicking echoing in the cold vehicle. "You sure about this, David?" Mike asked, his breath creating small clouds of vapor in the frigid air. They had turned off the engine to avoid drawing attention, and the bitter Montana winter was seeping through the metal frame like ice water. Once we access that box, we're officially interfering with what might be a federal investigation. David's eyes remained fixed on the bank's entrance, watching for any sign of surveillance or unusual activity. You can still walk away, Mike. No one would blame you for that. Mike snorted and shook his head, and missed the chance to finally do something that actually matters. Not likely. He nodded toward the back seat, but I'm not the one with the most to lose here. In the rear view mirror, David caught sight of Amanda Foster's worried face. She had put her career on the line by extending Tommy's emergency placement with David, defying both her supervisors and Chief Williams. Now she was going even further, helping them access evidence that powerful people clearly wanted to remain buried forever. "The hospital called," Amanda said, checking her phone with nervous fingers. Frank's latest blood work shows someone tampered with his IV again last night. A small dose, not enough to kill him, but enough to keep him heavily sedated. Hospital security found a maintenance worker who doesn't exist in their employment records. David's grip tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. They're getting desperate. How's Frank now? Dr. Hayes moved him to a different room under a false name and doubled the security presence. He's stable for now. Amanda leaned forward between the seats. But David, they're not going to stop coming after him and Tommy, and we still don't know who we can trust within the department. David nodded grimly. That was exactly why they needed what was hidden in that safe deposit box. Without the complete evidence, they were just fugitives with conspiracy theories. With it, they might have enough leverage to stay alive long enough to expose the truth. The plan was straightforward, at least in theory. Frank had added David's name to the safe deposit box access list years ago. He'd explained, as insurance he never expected to need. Now David would retrieve the contents, photograph everything with his phone, then replace it all exactly as he'd found it. If anyone was watching, it would appear to be a routine check rather than evidence gathering. Remember, David said, checking his watch. 15 minutes maximum. I go in, access the box, document everything, then get out. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, you wait exactly 5 more minutes, then leave and meet at the rendezvous point. Mike finished checking his weapon and holstered it. And if something goes wrong, then you get Tommy and Frank to safety and release what evidence we already have. David slipped the key from his pocket, small and brass, and unremarkable for the enormous weight it carried. Let's do this. The bank lobby echoed with David's footsteps on polished marble floors. A middle-aged woman at the reception desk looked up with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Good morning, Officer Martinez. How can I help you today? David kept his expression neutral despite his surprise at being recognized. In a town Pine Valley size, the local police were known by sight, but something about her immediate recognition felt wrong. I need to access a safe deposit box, please. Of course. May I see your identification and the key? David presented both, hyper-aware of the security cameras tracking his every movement. The woman examined his ID with what seemed like excessive care, then made a phone call, speaking too quietly for David to overhear. His pulse quickened. Was this normal procedure, or was something wrong? The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. Thank you for your patience, she said finally, standing with a smile that seemed forced. Please follow me. The vault area was eerily quiet, isolated from the modest activity of the main lobby. A security guard nodded to them as the receptionist led David to a small private room. Box 479 will be brought to you momentarily, she said, closing the door behind her. David checked his watch. 3 minutes elapsed already. When the bank employee arrived with the box, David thanked him with a calmness he didn't feel. As soon as the door closed, he removed the metal lid with trembling hands. Inside lay several USB drives, a leather-bound journal, and hundreds of pages of documents organized in color-coded folders. David quickly began photographing everything, starting with what appeared to be financial ledgers showing weapons shipments to countries under international embargo. Names were highlighted throughout the documents. Politicians, corporate executives, military officers, all connected to a web of corruption that stretched from Washington to conflict zones around the world. 5 minutes into his task, David's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Black SUV just pulled up. 2 men entering bank. Same type who took Tommy. David's hands moved faster, photographing page after page. Reports of civilian casualties. Internal memos discussing acceptable collateral damage in exchange for profit margins. Photographs of weapons crates being unloaded with Blackwater Solutions, logos clearly visible. GPS coordinates showing delivery locations in active war zones. Another text, they're talking to the manager showing badges, move faster. David was only halfway through the documents when his phone buzzed again. They're heading to the vault area. Get out now. He faced an impossible choice. Take the most damning evidence and reveal that someone had accessed the box, or stick to the original plan of leaving everything in place to avoid detection. His phone buzzed one final time. 30 seconds. Whatever you're going to do it now. Decision made, David grabbed one USB drive and the thinnest folder of documents, stuffing them inside his jacket. He carefully replaced the lid on the box and pressed the call button to summon the bank employee. The wait felt like an eternity. David could hear voices in the corridor outside, deep and authoritative, asking questions. The bank employee who had brought his box appeared flustered when he finally opened the door. All finished, Officer Martinez. Yes, thank you. David kept his voice level, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through his system. As they walked back toward the vault entrance, David caught sight of the 2 men in suits speaking with the bank manager. One glanced up, making brief but unmistakable eye contact with David. A flash of recognition crossed the man's face. Sir, the man called, stepping forward. A moment of your time, please. David pretended not to hear, increasing his pace slightly as he headed for the exit. The weight of the stolen documents pressed against his chest like a physical burn. Outside, the winter air hit his lungs with shocking intensity. Mike's car was gone from its parking spot, part of their contingency plan if things went wrong. David turned left, walking briskly, but not running, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to sprint. He had made it 2 blocks when he heard the footsteps behind him. Quick, purposeful strides closing the distance. David ducked into an alley between the hardware store and Pine Valley's only coffee shop, breaking into a run as soon as he was out of sight from the main street. The alley opened onto a small parking lot behind the row of businesses. David sprinted across it, heading for the maze of residential streets beyond. A shout echoed behind him, followed by the sound of running feet. David cut through backyards, vaulted over fences, and doubled back twice, using every trick he'd learned in 20 years of police work. His pursuers were well trained, but they were unfamiliar with Pine Valley's layout. It was a small advantage, but possibly enough. After 20 minutes of cat and mouse through the town's snow-covered neighborhoods, David finally reached his destination, St. Patrick's Catholic Church. The massive stone building stood empty on a weekday morning, its side door left unlocked for those seeking refuge or solace. David slipped inside, the sudden silence enveloping him like a warm blanket. His ragged breathing echoed in the empty nave as he made his way to the confessional booth, their predetermined emergency meeting point. Mike was already waiting inside the cramped wooden booth, a burner phone in his hand. "You okay?" David nodded, still catching his breath. "Got partial evidence, They identified me before I could finish. Where's Amanda? Safe with Tommy at Dr. Hayes' cabin. Called her as soon as I saw trouble developing. Mike handed him the burner phone. You need to see this. Came through while you were in the bank. The screen showed a news alert from the Pine Valley Gazette's website. Local officer suspended pending investigation into misconduct. David's own face stared back at him from his department photo, accompanied by text describing him as potentially dangerous and unstable. Williams moved fast, David muttered. She's cutting me off from all department resources. It gets worse. There's a bolo out for you now. Armed and dangerous, possibly suffering from a mental breakdown related to your wife's death. They're saying you've kidnapped Tommy Stevens. The confessional booth suddenly felt suffocating. They're setting me up, making sure no one will believe anything I say about Blackwater or the corruption. We need to get you out of town immediately. David shook his head firmly. Not without Frank. If we leave him, they'll silence him permanently. Mike checked his watch. Hospital shift change is in 45 minutes. Best time to move him if we're going to try. Too risky. The place will be crawling with their people. David closed his eyes, thinking desperately. Unless. 30 minutes later, an ambulance pulled up to the service entrance of Pine Valley Community Hospital. 2 EMTs, Mike in a borrowed uniform, and David with his face partially obscured by a surgical mask, rolled a gurney into the building. Their credentials, hastily arranged through one of Mike's cousins who worked for the county EMS, passed a cursory inspection at the security checkpoint. They headed directly to the 4th floor, where Frank had been moved under increased security. Dr. Hayes met them in the corridor, her face tight with barely controlled tension. He's sedated but stable for transport, she said, walking briskly alongside them. I've documented this as a transfer to Billings for specialized cardiac care. The paperwork should hold up for several hours at least. Anyone been asking about him? David kept his voice low. 2 men claiming to be from the FBI. I told them he was too unstable to answer questions. She stopped outside a room marked storage. I moved him again this morning. At this point, I don't trust anyone. Inside, Frank lay connected to portable monitors, his weathered face pale but peaceful. Despite the heavy medications, his eyes fluttered open as they prepared to transfer him to the transport gurney. Martinez, he whispered. We're getting you somewhere safe, David assured him, carefully disconnecting IV lines. Tommy's waiting for you. Frank's hand gripped David's wrist with surprising strength. The files, got some of them, enough to start with. Relief softened the old man's features. Good, there's more hidden at the cabin. Tommy knows where. They worked quickly, transferring Frank to the gurney and reconnecting his essential monitors. Dr. Hayes provided medications and detailed instructions for his continued care. Within minutes, they were heading back toward the service elevator, Frank covered with blankets to obscure his identity. As the elevator doors were closing, David caught sight of a familiar figure stepping out of the main elevator across the lobby. Chief Williams, her gaze sweeping the floor with predatory focus. David pressed himself against the wall of the service elevator, heart pounding as the doors finally closed. The ambulance ride was tense, every intersection a potential ambush point. David constantly scanned for signs of pursuit, while Mike navigated back roads toward the lake cabin where Tommy waited. Frank drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey, occasionally mumbling Tommy's name. The old man's determination to protect his grandson had kept him alive through poisoning attempts and constant fear. Now, finally, he might have a chance to see the boy safe. The cabin came into view just as the winter sun was setting, painting the frozen lake in brilliant orange and gold. Dr. Hayes' weekend retreat was larger than David had expected. A modern two-story structure with large windows overlooking the water, isolated from neighbors by several acres of pine forest. Amanda met them at the door, her professional composure cracking with relief at seeing them alive. "Thank God. Tommy's been asking for you both constantly." The boy himself appeared in the doorway behind her, his small face lighting up like sunrise at the sight of his grandfather being carefully unloaded from the ambulance. "Grandpa," he cried, starting to rush forward. "Careful, sweetheart," Amanda gently intercepted him. "Your grandpa needs to rest and get better." Once Frank was settled in the cabin's master bedroom, medical equipment arranged around him, David took Tommy aside. The boy curled against him on the living room sofa, exhaustion evident in the dark circles under his eyes. "Tommy, your grandpa said you know where he hid something important at your house. Something that could help us stop the bad people." The boy nodded solemnly. "The super secret pictures from Mommy and Daddy's work. Can you tell me where they are?" Tommy chewed his lower lip, considering. "I promised Grandpa it was a super extra secret." "I know, buddy, but your grandpa said it's okay to tell me now. We need those pictures to make sure the bad people can't hurt anyone else." Tommy studied David's face with that unnervingly adult gaze. "At our house, in my special hiding place, there's another secret place underneath. You have to press the animal pictures in the right order: bear, eagle, wolf." Despite everything, David smiled. "Leave it to Frank to create a child-friendly security system that would baffle most adults. We'll need to go back to your house, Tommy, but not tonight. Tonight we rest and make sure your grandpa gets better." As darkness fell completely, the cabin became a small island of warmth and safety in the vast frozen wilderness. Amanda prepared a simple dinner while Dr. Hayes monitored Frank's improving condition. Mike established security protocols, checking sight lines and identifying escape routes. David stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall again outside. In less than 48 hours, his entire life had been turned upside down. He was now a fugitive, harboring key witnesses in what appeared to be a massive conspiracy. His career was likely over, his reputation destroyed. Yet looking at Tommy, now curled up asleep on the sofa with his stuffed elephant, finally feeling safe enough to truly rest, David felt an unexpected sense of clarity. For 4 years since Maria's death, he had been going through the motions of living, a ghost in his own life. Now, with everything at stake, he felt fully alive again. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Frank had awakened, calling for him from the bedroom. David found the old man looking stronger already, sitting up slightly against his pillows. "They tried to poison me again at the hospital," Frank said without preamble. "Nurse I'd never seen before added something to my IV, but I was awake enough to see her face." David nodded. "Dr. Hayes found traces in your blood work. They're getting desperate. Which means we're close to something they can't afford to lose." Frank's eyes were clearer now, more focused. "Whatever you found at the bank, it's only part of the puzzle. The rest is hidden at the house, just like Tommy said. "We'll get it," David promised. "But Frank, there's something you should know. I've been suspended from the force. There's a warrant out for my arrest. They're claiming I kidnapped Tommy." Frank wasn't surprised. "They control your chief, probably others in the department too. How deep does this corruption go?" "Deeper than I ever imagined. Weapons trafficking, drug money, millions of dollars in illegal profits. Politicians bought and paid for, military contracts steered to criminal organizations. At the center of it all, Blackwater Solutions." Frank's face darkened with pain and anger. Michael discovered it by accident, shipping manifests that didn't match official records. He started investigating, collecting evidence, and they murdered him and Lisa for it. David pulled a chair closer to the bed. "Why didn't you go public immediately? Take everything to the press." "We tried. A reporter from the Billings Gazette was found dead in the Yellowstone River a week after we contacted her. Ruled an accidental drowning." Frank's voice broke with emotion. "After that, we just ran, changed identities, kept moving. I was trying to find someone we could trust, someone with enough integrity and power to protect us when we finally came forward." Frank's gaze drifted to the doorway, where Tommy had appeared, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The boy padded across the room and climbed carefully onto the bed beside his grandfather, who gathered him close with his good arm. "We're going home tomorrow, aren't we, Grandpa?" Tommy asked, looking between Frank and David. David nodded. "Just to get some very important things. Then we're going to find a place where you and your grandpa can be safe forever." "Will the shadow people be watching our house?" "Yes," David admitted, "which is why we'll need to be very careful and very brave." Tommy considered this seriously, then nodded with determination. "I'm not scared anymore, not with you and Grandpa together." As David looked at the boy and his grandfather, both survivors carrying wounds visible and invisible, he made a silent vow. Whatever it took, whatever the personal cost, he would see this through to the end. He would bring the truth to light, and he would keep them safe. The truth was worth dying for, but more importantly, it was worth living for. Dawn broke over the frozen lake with breathtaking beauty, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold that seemed almost supernatural. David Martinez stood on the cabin's porch, steam rising from his coffee mug as he surveyed the pristine stillness that surrounded them. In another life, he might have found peace in such tranquility. Now, he saw only vulnerability, open sight lines, limited escape routes, and tracks in the snow that couldn't be hidden from determined pursuers. Behind him, the cabin hummed with tense activity. Mike checked and rechecked their limited weapons supply. Amanda and Dr. Hayes reviewed Frank's medications, preparing doses for what could be a dangerous journey. Tommy sat at the kitchen table, methodically eating oatmeal while sketching what appeared to be a detailed map of his home, complete with X marks, indicating hiding spots and possible escape routes. "You absolutely sure about this?" Mike asked, joining David on the porch. "Going back to the Stevens house is walking straight into a trap." David nodded grimly. "We need what's hidden there. Without the complete evidence, we're just fugitives with wild conspiracy theories. With it, we might have enough leverage to stay alive long enough to expose the truth." Mike's breath created small clouds in the frigid air. "My contact in the state police says the feds have officially joined the manhunt. They're calling it a kidnapping case now, playing it up big for the media." David had expected as much. Any word on Williams? She's running the show from Pine Valley, coordinating with federal agents. She's telling everyone you snapped after getting too personally involved with the Stevens case. Mike hesitated. David, you need to know something else. They're bringing Maria into this. They're saying you never recovered from her death, that this is some kind of psychological breakdown. The familiar ache in David's chest sharpened to a stabbing pain. Using his dead wife against him was a new low, even for people who had already shown they would stop at nothing. All the more reason to get that evidence and clear my name. Inside, Frank's condition had stabilized enough for limited travel. The old man insisted on joining them despite Dr. Hayes' strong objections. I know every hiding place in that house, Frank argued from his makeshift bed in the living room. And Tommy will be calmer with me there to reassure him. David knelt beside him. Frank, it's too dangerous. You're still recovering from systematic poisoning. Frank's weathered hand gripped David's arm with surprising strength. My son-in-law died for those files. My daughter too. I won't hide in safety while you risk your life to finish what they started. In the end, they reached a compromise. Frank would remain in the vehicle with Dr. Hayes while David, Mike, and Amanda entered the house with Tommy. The boy would show them the hidden cache, then immediately return to his grandfather's side. The drive back to Pine Valley was tense, everyone acutely aware of the enormous risks they were taking. They used back roads and Forest Service routes, avoiding the main highways where state police might have established checkpoints. David drove Dr. Hayes' SUV, less recognizable than his patrol car, which they'd hidden in the cabin's garage. As they approached the outskirts of town, Amanda, who had been monitoring local news on her phone, gasped softly. They've released Tommy's photo to the media. They're calling it an Amber Alert situation. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Williams is painting us into a corner. If any civilians spot us with Tommy, we'll be seen as kidnappers, not protectors. That's exactly what they want, Mike said grimly from the passenger seat. They parked 4 blocks from the Stevens house, in the back lot of an abandoned gas station that had closed during the town's economic decline. From here, they could approach through the dense woods that bordered the property, minimizing their exposure to surveillance. I'll go first with Tommy, David said, checking his service weapon one final time. Mike, you cover our approach and watch for any movement. Amanda, stay with Frank and Dr. Hayes. If we're not back in 30 minutes, you get Tommy to safety and release whatever evidence we already have. We're not leaving without you, Frank interrupted from the back seat. Tommy clutched protectively against his side. David met the old man's eyes in the rearview mirror. 30 minutes, Frank. Then you get Tommy to safety and make sure the world knows the truth. Promise me. After a moment of tense silence, Frank nodded reluctantly. David turned to Tommy, who watched the adults with solemn understanding far beyond his years. Ready for another adventure, buddy? The boy nodded, slipping his small hand into David's with complete trust. I'll show you the secret place. The shadow people won't catch us. The walk through the woods was treacherous, with snow crunching beneath their boots despite their efforts to move quietly. Bare branches scratched at their faces like skeletal fingers reaching from the gray winter sky. Tommy moved with surprising confidence for a child, occasionally pointing out landmarks only he would notice. A tree that looked like a sleeping giant, a rock formation resembling a castle. As they reached the edge of the Stevens property, David crouched behind a large pine tree, surveying the house through binoculars. It sat dark and silent, no vehicles visible in the driveway or on the street. But something felt wrong. The stillness was too complete, too perfect. "Mike, what do you think?" David whispered. Mike studied the scene through his own binoculars. Definitely under surveillance. See that van parked 3 houses down, perfect sight line to both the front and back doors. And there's condensation on the upstairs windows. Someone's been inside recently, running the heat. David weighed their options. A frontal approach would be suicide. The back entrance was clearly being watched. That left one possibility. "Tommy, does your house have a basement window? One that might be hidden by bushes or something?" The boy thought for a moment, then nodded. "Behind Grandpa's flower garden. It's really small, though. Small enough for you to fit through." Understanding dawned in Tommy's eyes, and he nodded with the same determination that had carried him through so much already. "I can unlock the back door for you from inside." David shook his head immediately. "No way, it's too dangerous. But I know how to be super quiet. Grandpa taught me special walking for when the shadow people come." Mike touched David's shoulder. "We don't have many options here, David, and they might not be watching for a kid moving alone." David felt sick at the thought of sending Tommy into potential danger, but their alternatives were disappearing rapidly. With each passing minute, the risk of discovery increased exponentially. "Okay," he said finally, "but we do this very carefully. Mike and I will create a distraction on the far side of the property. You wait until we signal, then go straight to the basement window. Get inside, go directly to the back door, and let us in. No detours, no matter what you hear. Understand?" Tommy nodded solemnly, his small face set with grim determination. The distraction was simple, but effective. Mike used his pocket knife to cut the telephone line on the opposite side of the house, making just enough noise to draw attention without being immediately identifiable as human activity. As predicted, 2 men emerged from the surveillance van, moving cautiously toward the source of the disturbance. David signaled to Tommy, who darted across the snow-covered yard with remarkable speed for his size. The boy disappeared behind the overgrown flower garden that Frank had neglected during his illness. Seconds stretched into minutes that felt like hours. David's heart pounded so loudly, he was certain it would give away their position. What if there were men inside the house? What if Tommy was caught? The self-recrimination was overwhelming. He had sent a 6-year-old child into mortal danger. Just as David was preparing to abort the mission and storm the house himself, the back door opened a crack. Tommy's small face appeared, motioning them forward urgently. They moved swiftly across the open space, David first with Mike covering their rear. Inside the house, the temperature was cold and still, exactly as they had left it days ago. Blood still stained the living room floor where Frank had fallen, a dark reminder of how this nightmare had begun. "This way," Tommy whispered, leading them upstairs to his bedroom. The child's room was painfully ordinary. Dinosaur posters on the walls, a small bed with a space-themed comforter, toys arranged neatly on shelves. It was the room of a normal 6-year-old boy, which made the hidden compartments and secret passages seem even more tragic. Tommy went directly to his closet, pushing aside hanging clothes to reveal the hidden door David had discovered during his first visit. The secret place is inside the secret place, Tommy explained, crawling into the small panic room. Inside the cramped space, the boy pressed the animal images in the sequence he had described: bear, eagle, wolf. A section of the floor panel slid away with a soft click, revealing a deeper compartment that had been invisible even during David's thorough search. Inside lay a waterproof case, sealed with combination locks that looked military grade. "Do you know the combination, Tommy?" The boy nodded. "Mommy's birthday, 081579. Tommy's small fingers spun the dials with practiced ease, suggesting he had done this many times before. "Grandpa made me practice until I could do it super fast, even in the dark." The case opened to reveal another set of USB drives, a thick manila envelope, and a leather-bound journal identical to the one David had photographed at the bank. Most significantly, there was a stack of DVDs labeled with dates and locations, suggesting video evidence of the conspiracy. "Video recordings," Mike breathed. "That's the smoking gun we needed." David quickly transferred everything into his backpack. "Let's move. We've been here too long already." As they turned to leave Tommy's bedroom, a floorboard creaked ominously in the hallway outside. All three froze. Mike drew his weapon, motioning for David to get Tommy back into the hidden room. Before they could move, the bedroom door burst open. Two men in tactical gear stood in the doorway, weapons raised and ready. "Police, hands where we can see them." The lead man's eyes fixed on Tommy with predatory intensity. "Son, come over here. You're safe now." David stepped protectively in front of the boy. "Federal agents, I'm guessing, or Blackwater contractors." The man's face hardened. "Officer Martinez, you're under arrest for kidnapping, interfering with a federal investigation, and assault on federal officers. Put your hands up and step away from the child." Mike still had his weapon raised, creating a dangerous standoff. "Let me see some identification." Slowly. As the agent reached for his credentials, Tommy did something completely unexpected. He darted forward, slipping between the men's legs and into the hallway before anyone could react. "Tommy," David lunged after him, only to be tackled by the second agent. They crashed into the bedroom wall, picture frames shattering around them like exploding glass. Mike fired a warning shot into the ceiling, temporarily freezing the action. "Back off. We're police officers investigating corruption." The momentary distraction was enough for David to break free, shoving his attacker aside and sprinting after Tommy. He could hear the boy's footsteps pounding down the stairs, heading for the front door. "Tommy, wait." David burst outside just in time to see the boy running toward the woods, directly into the path of an unmarked black sedan speeding up the street. Time slowed to a nightmarish crawl. David launched himself forward, knowing he couldn't reach Tommy in time. A scream tore from his throat as the sedan bore down on the small figure. From the opposite direction came the squeal of tires as Dr. Hayes' SUV careened around the corner. Frank Stevens sat in the passenger seat, the door already flung open as the vehicle skidded to a stop. Despite his weakened condition, the old man lunged out with strength born of pure desperation, snatching Tommy from the path of the oncoming sedan. The black car swerved, missing them by inches before crashing into a snowbank with a tremendous impact. David reached Frank and Tommy, gathering them both toward the SUV, where Amanda was frantically motioning them inside. Behind them, shots rang out from the house. Mike appeared, running backward while returning fire, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Go, go, go," he shouted, diving into the SUV as Dr. Hayes floored the accelerator. As they sped away, David held Tommy close, the boy shaking violently against him. Frank collapsed against his seat, his face gray with pain and exertion, one hand pressed against his chest in obvious cardiac distress. "I've got you," David whispered to them both. "I've got you." But Frank's eyes were becoming unfocused, his breathing increasingly labored. He clutched at David's sleeve, his mouth working silently before finally forcing out words that chilled everyone in the vehicle. "My heart," he gasped. "Tell Tommy I love." His hand went slack, his eyes closing as consciousness slipped away. Dr. Hayes glanced in the rearview mirror, her medical training instantly recognizing the crisis unfolding. "He's in cardiac arrest. I need to pull over immediately." But behind them, two black sedans had appeared, closing the distance with alarming speed. Mike fired through the rear window, shattering glass across the back seat. "We can't stop," he shouted over the chaos. Dr. Hayes continued driving, while Amanda climbed into the back seat, immediately beginning CPR on Frank's motionless form. David held Tommy, turning the boy's face away from the sight of his grandfather's ashen features and Amanda's desperate compressions. "Don't look, buddy," he whispered into Tommy's hair. "Don't look." But it was too late. In the reflection of the side window, Tommy had seen everything. His small body went rigid, then began to shake with silent, devastating sobs that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. And in that moment, as they fled through the snowy landscape with bullets striking their vehicle, David knew that whether Frank Stevens lived or died, a piece of this child's heart was being irreparably shattered. Some wounds, he realized with crushing certainty, never truly heal. The abandoned hunting cabin stood deep in Montana's northern wilderness, 30 miles from the nearest paved road. Snow had drifted against its weathered log walls, and icicles hung like crystal daggers from the sagging eaves. Inside, a small fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room's only occupants. David Martinez sat at a rough-hewn table, surrounded by the evidence they'd risked everything to obtain. Files, photographs, and USB drives were spread before him like pieces of a massive, deadly puzzle. His eyes burned from lack of sleep and the strain of reading by firelight, but he couldn't stop. Not when they were so close to having everything they needed. In the cabin's only bedroom, Tommy Stevens lay curled beneath layers of blankets, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion after hours of silent, heartbreaking grief. Amanda Thompson sat beside him, gently stroking his hair, her own eyes red-rimmed from crying. Frank Stevens was dead. Despite Dr. Hayes' desperate efforts at resuscitation, the old man's heart had given out during their escape. The final cruel culmination of stress, systematic medication tampering, and the superhuman effort he'd made to save his grandson one last time. They had been forced to leave his body at a rural emergency clinic, fleeing just as the first police cruisers arrived in response to the clinic's mandatory report. Now, 4 days later, they were officially fugitives. David and Mike were wanted for kidnapping, assault on federal officers, and obstruction of justice. Amanda faced charges for aiding and abetting, and Dr. Hayes for falsifying medical records and interfering with a federal investigation. Mike entered the cabin with a swirl of snow, stamping his boots on the threshold. Perimeters clear, no tracks except wildlife. He hung his coat on a peg, revealing the gun holstered at his side. His service weapon had become a symbol of their fallen careers and desperate circumstances. "How's Tommy?" Mike asked quietly. "Finally sleeping," David said, his voice rough from disuse. "Amanda's been with him. The kid's been through hell." Mike nodded, pouring himself coffee from the pot warming on the wood stove. "And the evidence. It's all here, Mike." David gestured to the documents spread before him like an accusation. Everything Frank and Michael collected. Shipping manifests proving Blackwater Solutions diverted American weapons to terrorist groups. Financial records showing payoffs to officials who looked the other way. Video footage of meetings between Blackwater executives and foreign arms dealers. David slid a photograph across the table. Names, dozens of them, including our own Chief Williams. Mike's face hardened as he studied the image of Victoria Williams, accepting an envelope from a man they now knew was Blackwater's head of security. Jesus, how deep does this corruption go? All the way to Washington. Senators, Pentagon officials, intelligence directors. David rubbed his burning eyes. No wonder they've been hunting the Stevens family. This evidence could bring down an entire network of treason and profiteering. So what's our next move? We can't exactly walk into FBI headquarters with this. They'd confiscate everything, and we'd disappear into some black site prison. David had been wrestling with this exact question for days. They needed a way to release the evidence publicly while ensuring their own safety. More importantly, they needed to guarantee Tommy's protection. "There's something else," David said quietly. "Something I found in Frank's journal." He opened the leather-bound book to a marked page. He had a contingency plan, a contact in Canada with copies of some of the evidence. Not everything, but enough to corroborate what we have. Mike leaned forward with interest. "So we make a run for the border. It's our best chance. Once we're across, we contact this lawyer, go public with everything simultaneously. Make it too big for them to contain or cover up." Amanda appeared in the bedroom doorway, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. "He's asking for you, David." Inside the small bedroom, Tommy sat up against the pillows, wrapped in Frank's old cardigan, despite it being several sizes too large. The boy's face was pale, his eyes hollow with a grief no 6-year-old should ever have to endure. "Hey, buddy," David said gently, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed. "How are you feeling?" Tommy didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked the question that had been haunting him since Frank's death. "Are the bad people going to kill us too, like they killed Mommy and Daddy and Grandpa?" David's heart felt like it was breaking. How do you promise safety to a child whose entire family has been systematically eliminated? "We're going to do everything we can to keep you safe, Tommy. Mike and Amanda and I, we're all working together to protect you. But you can't really stop them," Tommy said with the terrible clarity of a child who had seen too much. "Nobody can." "That's not true, Tommy. Your grandpa and your parents, they collected evidence, proof of the bad things these people did. And now we have that proof. With it, we can tell everyone what happened. We can make sure the bad people get punished." Tommy considered this with the same serious expression that had characterized him since David first met him. The secret files. Yes, the secret files. With those, we can tell the whole world the truth about what happened to your family. Grandpa said the files would make us safe, but they didn't. They killed him anyway. The brutal logic of a child who had lost everything. David struggled to find words that wouldn't be empty promises. Your grandpa was very brave, Tommy. He protected those files and protected you because he believed that truth wins in the end. He believed that enough good people would stand up once they knew what was happening. Are you a good person? Tommy asked, studying David's face with those unnervingly adult eyes. I'm trying to be. The boy nodded, seemingly satisfied with this honest answer. Grandpa said you were. He said you felt right. Tommy hesitated, then added quietly, I want to help catch the bad people who hurt my family. You already have, Tommy. You showed us where to find the evidence. You've been braver than anyone could expect. Tommy's small jaw set with determination that was heartbreaking in someone so young. There's one more thing. Grandpa showed me another hiding place for the worst emergency ever. David's pulse quickened. What hiding place, Tommy? At the lake, under the fishing cabin. Grandpa said there's a recording of the man who ordered my mommy and daddy to be killed. A cold chill ran down David's spine. If Frank had managed to record the actual order for Michael and Lisa's murder, that would be the final piece of evidence they needed. The smoking gun that would make denial impossible. Can you show us where this cabin is? Tommy nodded. It's Grandpa's secret fishing place. I can show you on a map. Using a state map they'd found in the cabin, Tommy pointed to a small lake near the Canadian border. It's there. Grandpa took me fishing last summer. He showed me the secret place under the floor where he hid his most important treasure. Mike studied their location on the map. That's less than 40 miles from the border, crossing at Sweetgrass. If this recording exists, we grab it on our way out of the country. They agreed to leave at dawn. The weather forecast called for heavy snow, which would make driving treacherous, but also provide cover for fugitives trying to stay hidden. Dr. Hayes, who had left the previous day to establish an alibi and throw off potential pursuit, would meet them at a predetermined location just south of the border crossing. That night, as the others slept, David sat by the dying fire, reviewing the evidence one final time. Among Frank's papers, he found a sealed envelope addressed simply for Officer Martinez. Inside was a handwritten letter. Officer Martinez, if you're reading this, I am gone. I've seen how you look at my grandson, with the same protective instinct I've felt since the day he came to live with me. You're a good man, perhaps one of the few left in a world gone increasingly dark. What Michael and Lisa uncovered goes beyond weapons sales or government corruption. Blackwater Solutions is merely the visible face of a shadow network that has operated within our system for decades, manipulating foreign policy to create conflicts that benefit their financial interests. The recording hidden at the fishing cabin contains a conversation between Blackwater's CEO and a man whose voice you will recognize. A man who has built his career on patriotism while selling out his country for profit. On this recording, they explicitly discuss arranging the accident that killed Michael and Lisa. I kept this evidence separate from the rest because it is the most dangerous. With it, there can be no denial, no scapegoating of lower-level operatives. If something happens to me, I ask only one thing: protect Tommy. He is the last of my family, the only innocent left in this nightmare. Whatever happens, whatever you decide to do with this evidence, please keep him safe. With respect and gratitude, Frank Stevens. David folded the letter carefully, slipping it into his pocket. The weight of Frank's trust and the responsibility for Tommy's safety settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. Dawn came with howling winds and driving snow, perfect conditions for their escape, but treacherous for travel. They packed quickly, loading their few possessions and the precious evidence into Dr. Hayes' SUV. Tommy, bundled in layers of borrowed clothing, clutched his stuffed elephant silently as David secured his seatbelt. "Ready for our final adventure, buddy?" The boy nodded solemnly. "To Grandpa's fishing place, then to Canada to see the lawyer man." "That's right, and then all of this will be over." The drive north was slow and tense, every passing vehicle a potential threat. They avoided main highways, sticking to Forest Service roads and rural routes. The SUV's four-wheel drive strained against deepening snow drifts that threatened to trap them miles from help. 3 hours into their journey, as they passed through a particularly isolated stretch of wilderness, David spotted headlights behind them. The first vehicle they'd seen in nearly an hour. "We've got company," he said quietly. Mike twisted in his seat, peering through the rear window. "Could be nothing, local traffic." David accelerated slightly, watching the headlights in his mirrors. "They're gaining on us." The vehicle behind them, now identifiable as a black SUV, similar to the ones that had pursued them before, flashed its high beams. Red and blue lights began pulsing from its grille. "Police lights," Mike confirmed grimly. "But no siren, not real police," David concluded. "Everyone hold on." He pressed the accelerator to the floor, the SUV lurching forward through the snow. The pursuing vehicle immediately gave chase, closing the distance with alarming speed despite the treacherous conditions. "They're going to ram us," Amanda cried, throwing her body protectively over Tommy. David swerved onto a narrow side road, barely visible through the swirling snow. Tree branches scraped against the windows as they bounced down the unplowed track. Behind them, their pursuers attempted the same turn, but skidded, buying them precious seconds. "Where are we?" Mike demanded, checking the map with a flashlight. "No idea," David admitted, "just trying to lose them." The road, little more than a logging trail, wound deeper into the forest. Snow built up beneath the chassis, slowing their progress. David fought the wheel as the vehicle slid and fishtailed on the icy surface. Behind them, headlights appeared again, more cautious now, but still pursuing relentlessly. There, Tommy suddenly pointed through the windshield. Grandpa's lake. Through a break in the trees, they caught a glimpse of frozen water, white and desolate in the winter storm. David turned toward it, following what appeared to be an access road leading to the shore. A small wooden structure came into view, Frank's fishing cabin, nearly buried in snow drifts. David skidded to a stop beside it. "Mike, you and Amanda get the recording. I'll try to lead them away." "Like hell," Mike objected. "We stick together." "There's no time to argue. That recording is everything. It needs to get to the lawyer in Canada." David reached into the back seat, squeezing Tommy's shoulder. "Show them, buddy, just like Grandpa showed you." Tommy nodded, his face pale but determined. "I know where it is." As Mike, Amanda, and Tommy rushed toward the cabin, David spun the SUV around, headlights off, and drove back the way they had come. As expected, he encountered the pursuing vehicle about a quarter mile back up the trail. David flashed his lights once, then swerved around them, intentionally sideswiping their vehicle before speeding away. The trap was set. Now he just had to stay alive long enough for the others to find the recording and make it to Canada. But as David checked his rearview mirror and saw not one but 3 sets of headlights in pursuit, he realized the game had changed completely. They had anticipated the divide-and-conquer strategy. Some of their pursuers would follow him, but others would surely double back to the fishing cabin. Mike, Amanda, and Tommy were walking into an ambush, and David was too far away to help them. He slammed on the brakes, executing a dangerous 180-degree turn on the narrow, icy road. He had to get back to them, but as he accelerated toward the lake, his headlights illuminated a chilling sight ahead. A roadblock of black SUVs stretched across the trail, and standing in the center, unmistakable even in the swirling snow, was Chief Victoria Williams. She raised a bullhorn to her lips. "Martinez, it's over. Surrender now." Behind her stood at least a dozen armed men in tactical gear, their weapons trained on David's approaching vehicle. He was trapped, outnumbered, and outgunned. But somewhere behind him, Tommy was depending on him to somehow find a way out of this nightmare. David stopped the SUV and slowly raised his hands, allowing himself to be surrounded. Weapons pointed at his head from all directions as Williams approached, a triumphant smile on her face. "You've caused us a lot of trouble, Martinez," she said with satisfaction. As they forced him from the vehicle at gunpoint, David spoke 3 words that wiped the expression from her face. "I have insurance." 1 year later, golden summer light streamed through the windows of a modest farmhouse just outside Billings, Montana. David Martinez stood at the kitchen sink, watching through the window as Tommy chased fireflies across the twilight lawn. The boy's childish laughter floated on the evening breeze, a sound that still brought tears to David's eyes. "He's getting so much faster," Amanda observed, coming to stand beside him. She slipped her arm around his waist, leaning her head against his shoulder in a gesture that had become natural over the months of rebuilding their lives together. "Dr. Peterson says his lung capacity has improved dramatically. The asthma attacks are almost completely gone now." David nodded, smiling as Tommy triumphantly captured a glowing insect in his cupped hands, then released it with ceremonious care. "He's healing. We all are." The path to this peaceful moment had been fraught with danger, sacrifice, and revelations that had shaken the country to its core. That winter night at the lake, when David had surrendered to Chief Williams, he'd been playing his final, desperate card. "I have insurance," he told Williams as she approached with her triumphant smile. Frank Miller was smarter than any of us realized. He knew someone in the department was compromised. Why do you think he called me that night? A patrol officer he barely knew, instead of going through official channels. Williams had faltered slightly. He called you because his confused mind couldn't remember proper procedure. No, he called me because I was the only officer who'd never had any contact with Blackwater Solutions. The only one he'd researched and deemed trustworthy. David had met her eyes steadily. "The recording you're looking for isn't at the fishing cabin. It was never there." The confusion on William's face had been genuine. "You're bluffing." Frank Miller mailed copies of everything to news outlets across the country 5 days before he was poisoned. Time-delayed emails with access codes to secure servers. In about, David had checked his watch. 6 hours, the Washington Post, New York Times, and CNN will simultaneously receive irrefutable evidence of Blackwater's weapons sales to terrorist groups, along with a recording of Senator William Harding discussing the murder of Michael and Lisa Stevens. The name had hit like a physical blow. Senator Harding, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, decorated war veteran, and presumed presidential candidate, was Blackwater's highest-placed asset. "That's impossible," Williams had whispered, but uncertainty had clouded her features. Frank's final insurance policy. He knew they might get him, might even capture the evidence we carried. So he created a dead man's switch. If he didn't enter a security code every 72 hours, the files would automatically release. David had shrugged. It's been 6 days since he died. What had followed was a chaotic scramble as Williams and her Blackwater handlers tried to verify David's claim. They'd released Mike, Amanda, and Tommy from the fishing cabin, bringing them to the abandoned ranger station where David was being held. Phones had rung constantly as Blackwater executives, and their government collaborators weighed their rapidly disappearing options. David had remained resolute. "The only way to stop the release is for me to enter an abort code, which I'll only do if Tommy is guaranteed complete safety and immunity for everyone involved in protecting him." In the end, they'd agreed, not out of mercy but desperation. David had been escorted to a computer terminal where he'd entered a complex series of characters. The Blackwater operatives had relaxed, believing they'd contained the crisis. What they hadn't known was that David had actually triggered the immediate release of all the files. By morning, the story had exploded across every major news platform. Senator Harding was arrested while attempting to board a private jet to a non-extradition country. Blackwater's executives faced federal indictments that would keep them in prison for the rest of their lives. The scandal reached into the highest levels of government, exposing a network of corruption that had operated for decades. In the ensuing chaos, David, Mike, Amanda, and Dr. Hayes had been able to negotiate full immunity in exchange for their testimony. More importantly, they'd secured complete protection for Tommy. A new identity, a trust fund created from seized Blackwater assets, and the right to determine his own future. The subsequent trials had lasted months. David had testified before congressional committees, federal grand juries, and international tribunals. Throughout it all, Tommy had remained at his side, gradually emerging from the shell of trauma and grief into which he'd retreated. Now, as summer deepened across Montana, they were building something new together. David had used his settlement money to purchase this small ranch where Tommy could have space to run and shout and simply be a child again. Amanda, who had also left her position with Child Protective Services, was now Tommy's legal co-guardian alongside David. Their relationship had blossomed amid the crucible of shared danger and purpose. Mike Brennan visited regularly, having returned to law enforcement as the new police chief of Pine Valley following the department's complete restructuring. Dr. Hayes continued her medical practice, but made time every Sunday to check on Tommy's health and join them for dinner. They had become a family, forged in tragedy, but determined to build something beautiful from the ashes of corruption and loss. Inside the farmhouse, the television murmured with the evening news. David caught fragments of the ongoing story. Another Blackwater executive pleading guilty, new evidence of offshore accounts, the continued investigation into military contracts. The tentacles of corruption they'd exposed were still being traced and severed, a process that would likely continue for years. But here, in this peaceful corner of the world, David had found something he'd thought lost forever after Maria's death: purpose. Not just in bringing criminals to justice, but in helping a wounded child find joy again. Outside, Tommy had stopped chasing fireflies and was now looking up at the emerging stars, his face solemn with concentration. "What are you thinking about, buddy?" David asked, stepping onto the porch. Tommy pointed upward at the glittering night sky. "Grandpa said when people die, they become stars so they can watch over the people they love. Do you think my mom and dad and grandpa are up there, watching me?" David's throat tightened as he knelt beside the boy. "I think they're very proud of how brave and strong you've been." Tommy considered this, then slipped his small hand into David's larger one. "I still miss them a lot, I know. I still miss people I've lost too. Your wife, the one in the picture by your bed." David nodded, surprised that Tommy had noticed the photograph he kept of Maria. "Yes, her name was Maria. Does it ever stop hurting?" "Not completely," David admitted. "But it changes. The hurt makes room for happy memories and for new people to love." Tommy leaned against David's side, his small body warm and trusting. "I'm glad you answered Grandpa's call that night." David wrapped his arm around the boy's shoulders, looking up at the star-filled sky. "Me too, buddy, me too." Amanda joined them on the porch, the three of them standing together in comfortable silence as dusk deepened into night. From somewhere in the distance came the hooting of an owl, the whisper of wind through summer leaves. This was not the life David Martinez had imagined for himself. The path here had been marked by loss and danger, by moral choices with impossible stakes. Yet standing on this porch, with Tommy's hand in his and Amanda's presence beside them, he felt something he had thought forever lost after Maria's death: peace. Frank Stevens' final legacy hadn't just been justice for his family or the exposure of massive corruption. It had been this: the creation of a new family from the fragments of broken lives, held together by love and the simple, profound courage to begin again. As they turned to go inside, Tommy paused in the doorway, looking back at the night sky one more time. "Good night, Grandpa," he whispered softly. "Good night, Mom and Dad." David squeezed the boy's shoulder gently. Together, they closed the door on the darkness and stepped into the light of home. In our later years, we often wonder if our lives have truly mattered. Like Officer David Martinez, many of us have weathered profound losses, questioning our purpose after losing spouses, children, or dear friends. We've witnessed corruption erode institutions we once trusted. We've seen children, our own or others, face a world more complex and dangerous than the one we knew. Yet David's journey reminds us that our wisdom and protection remain desperately needed. When young Tommy lost everything, it was an older man's courage, Frank's unwavering determination to protect his grandson, that ultimately saved him. It was David's lifetime of experience that helped him navigate the darkness when others would have given up. Our years give us perspective to recognize what truly matters. Not wealth or status, but the courage to stand for truth and the capacity to love those who need us most. Like Frank Stevens, we all leave legacies, sometimes in ways we never expected. The wisdom we've earned through decades of living isn't meant to retire with us. It's meant to light the path for those who follow. In protecting the vulnerable and standing for justice, we discover that our lives' deepest purpose never truly ends. The strength we've built through hardship, the moral clarity that comes with experience, and our capacity for love become the foundation upon which others can build their hope. Never underestimate the power of an experienced heart that refuses to give up on what's right. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.